How savagely Valorian of you. Is this the traditional military oath? I like it. I accept. She nodded slightly and cast Arryn an unreadable look, tinged perhaps with something like regret, though it was hard to know exactly what had affected her. Maybe it was his expression, or maybe a memory floating invisibly in the darkening summer air, seen only by her. She left them. If you send her into battle, Arryn told Roshar, she'll fall in the first wave. Why? Because she's half your size? I'll wager she's had more training than the average foot soldier. She has no talent for it, and little experience. She wants this, Arryn. I don't blame her for wanting it, and quite frankly, I think her help could be crucial. Her advice. Let her advise, then. Enlist her, rank her, if you must, but keep her out of combat. All right, Roshar said. For you. Arryn turned to leave. His head was brimming, his heart sore. Roshar touched his shoulder, surprisingly gentle. I know you want her to be safe forever, but it's just not that kind of world. Arryn begged a pair of Harani officers to share a tent. He shouldered the spare one, loosely bundled. He found a woman about Kestrel's height and bartered a little boot knife for a set of decent clothes. He rummaged through supply wagons and stared dully at the extra suits of armour, all far too large, swords too heavy. He considered a gun among the many rows of them, hidden in a false bottom below bales of horse feed. Unsure, he left the guns where they lay. Finally, he snagged an eastern crossbow. Even if Roshar kept his word and tried to keep Kestrel from any real military action, there was always the possibility of a surprise attack. He brought everything to Kestrel. It was full night. Light from a nearby fire flickered in her face. He tried not to look at her. He crouched and began to set the tent's frame. He drove a stake into the earth, drier now. There was a pause after he hammered the first stake in. He straightened. I thought... Kestrel's voice trailed into the dark. She didn't say what she thought. She touched his wrist, light as a moth. Arryn flinched. He didn't mean to. He wanted to undo it, yet flitting through his mind was a nightmarish sequence of images. A masker moth, the signed treaty in Kestrel's wintry hand, the Valorian girl he had killed at sea, his mother's bloody black hair. Kestrel drew back. He seemed to feel her echo his hurt. I can do that. She took the stone from his hand. My father taught me how to pitch a tent. I remember. What else do you remember? Arryn wanted to ask, and was repulsed by himself. He knew how much what she did remember wounded her. He hadn't thought it'd be possible to hate the general more, yet there it was, a hot jet of hatred. He said, I won't spare your father. The shadows were too deep between them. He couldn't read her face. She said, I don't want you to. Chapter 21. They continued south. Arryn kept his distance from her. Once or twice she rode Javelin alongside his horse. It went badly. He didn't know how to fix himself. He couldn't accept this. The first time she drew her horse up to him, he burst out, For God's sake, you don't even have armour. I know you're worried, she said quietly. Your father wanted you to enlist. You fought him. Your music, you loved it more. You told me once that you didn't want to go to war because you didn't want to kill. This is important to me. You wouldn't have done this before. I know. I've changed. He heard the truth of this in a way he never had. She'd said this many times, even insisted on it. The woman he'd known was gone. He heard again his promise to her in his tent. He felt the absence of hers. Yet it was wrong to feel hurt in the face of her larger grief, and the wrongness of it made him feel small. He looked at the sun in her hair, the ease of her seat in the saddle. Beyond her, a file of cavalry, an eastern pennant snapping blue and green. Fear choked him. It was hard to hear what she said next. A promise to be careful, to take no risks. It was so impossible and absurd to make any promise like that in war that he couldn't even reply. Eventually, she fell silent. The next time, also on the road, he noticed her weaving javelin through the ranks to approach him. He twitched his horse left and found a reason to be somewhere else. At night, he waited until she had pitched her tent. He made sure not to set his nearby. She continued to glow at the edge of his vision. When camp broke at dawn, he'd catch sight of her bright hair, notice her talking effortlessly with the Harani, or trying to learn Dakran from the Easterners. He watched the soldiers' wariness dissolve. They began to smile at her arrival, to like her despite themselves and her appearance, the very image of a Valorian warrior girl. She kept close company with Roshar. Arryn saw from afar the way the prince teased her, heard her laugh. It squeezed a fist inside him. At dusk, the pair of them played cards. Roshar bled the air with a string of Eastern curses when he lost. On an evening when they were about 10 leagues from Erilith, Arryn came to Roshar's tent, which was large enough to accommodate a small table, a set of canvas-back chairs, and a collapsible bed woven in the style and colours of the nomadic plains people. The ticking had feathers, not straw, and the table offered roasted fowl, hulled red berries, and a bowl of Eastern rice rendered a shocking orange by a spice Arryn had tasted before, and found tangy, sweet, and a little bitter. There was a gourd of wine and 2 pewter cups, 2 plates. "And lo," Roshar said from where he lounged in his teak chair with its swoop of green cloth, "the reins opened, and the stranger was a stranger no more." Arryn looked at him. "Poetry," Roshar explained, "though it doesn't scan so well in your tongue." "You're expecting someone." "Maybe. You'll do for now. Sit with me. Kestrel." "Pardon me? Are you expecting Kestrel?" The question came out flat. Roshar coughed. "No," he drawled, but Arryn didn't like the humour in his voice. He sat anyway and watched Roshar prepare a plate for him, which wasn't at all expected of an Eastern prince and his guest, but Roshar sometimes liked to play the prince and sometimes didn't. "Kestrel has raised the issue of Valorian scouts. We can't expect to be wholly unnoticed, tramping along the main southern road. There's been no attack," which was what Arryn thought would ensue if the Valorians became aware of their movements. "She wagers that the general has noticed the concentration of our forces at Lerillon. Whether he knows of this contingent is unclear, but he might be refraining from attacking us because he doesn't want to position forces north of Erilith when his supply lines run south of it. Or, maybe, he thinks we'll choose to defend the wrong estate, and he can seize his prize unchallenged. Why confront us now and pay the price in blood if we'll waste our energies elsewhere while he takes what he wants? Of course, Erilith could be the wrong estate. If Kestrel says that's the one, she's right. I agree." Roshar drank his wine. Arryn tried to eat. "Have you ever bested her at cards? Borderlands? Anything? She murders me," Roshar complained. "You spend a good deal of time with her." Roshar's cup paused in mid-air. Arryn. Swift jealousy. A caged resentment. "I'm not, shall we say, interested in Kestrel." The prince's expression changed slightly, and in the pause that followed, a slow thought occurred to Arryn, one that offered an entirely new explanation for why Roshar's soldiers had done nothing when Arryn had pushed him into the shadowed trees. "Women don't interest me that way," Roshar said. It seemed to Arryn that he had understood this for a long time without actually realising that he did. He caught Roshar's expression, which on another man Arryn might have called tentative, but on the prince looked closer to soft curiosity. His black eyes were quiet. Arryn felt things shift between them into more intricate patterns than before. "I know," Arryn told him. "Oh, do you?" A wicked grin. "Would you like to know for sure?" Arryn flushed. "Roshar..." He floundered for what to say. The prince laughed at him. He filled Arryn's cup. "Drink fast, little Harani. As you astutely observed, I have someone else coming tonight. And while your company is almost always welcome, his is company I will best enjoy alone." Kestrel waited outside Arryn's tent. It was a muzzy sort of night, too warm for a fire. The camp was a dark terrain. He didn't see her clearly, just the shape of her. "I brought you something." She held out her hand and dropped a round object into his. He knew it instantly. He ran fingers over its firm, lightly pebbled surface. An orange. "I found a tree not far from camp and took as many as I could carry. Most I gave away. This one I thought we could share." He jumped the orange from one hand to the other, marvelling at it. She said, "I didn't know whether you like them." "I do." "Did you tell this to me once? Did I forget?" "I never told you. Actually..." He rolled it into the well of one palm. "I love them." He could have sworn that she smiled in the dark. "Then what are you waiting for?" He dug his thumb in and peeled it open. Its perfume sprayed the air. He halved it and gave Kestrel her share. They sat on the grass outside his tent. They'd camped in a meadow not far from the road. He touched the grass, sleek beneath his fingers. He ate. The fruit was vibrant on his tongue. It had been years. "Thank you." He thought he saw her mouth curve, and he was washed by a breathless nervousness. He spat a seed into his palm and wondered what little kernel lay in the folds of this moment. Then he told himself to stop thinking. An orange, a rare enough pleasure. Just eat. After a moment he asked, "How are you?" "Better. Before, it was like I was trying to navigate a new country where there was no such thing as the ground. At least now I know where I stand." He heard the sound of her brushing her hands clean, and then the sound of things unsaid, of words weighed and found wanting. Sorrow radiating from her, the low throb of it. Gently he asked, "Are you truly better?" He heard her breath catch. "You don't have to be better." The silence expanded. He said, "I wouldn't be." Her voice was a mere thread. "How would you be?" He thought of the wrongness of loss. How as a child he'd step right into it and fall, and then would blame himself not only for everything he hadn't done when the soldiers had invaded his home, but also for his fathomless grief. He should see the gaping holes in his life, avoid them, step carefully, Aaron. Why can't you step carefully? Mother, father, sister. What could you say about someone who walked daily into his grief and lived at the bottom of its hole and didn't even want to come out? He remembered how he'd begun to hate himself, the sculpting of his anger. He thought about how certain words mean themselves and also their opposites, like cleave, come together, split apart. He thought about how sorrow limbs the places where parts of you join, your past and present, loves and hates. It sets a chisel into the cracks and pries. He wanted to say this, yet worried. He feared saying the wrong thing. He feared that his anger for her father might twist what he wanted to say, and he wasn't sure, suddenly, if he should answer her question. If, by answering it, he might, without meaning to, push his own loss into the place of hers, or make hers look like his. He stared at the dark outline of her face. Her question overwhelmed him. Until it didn't. Until he seemed to be able to see in the dark. He knew how she must be tightening her jaw, how she was curling her nails into her palms. He knew her. I think that you try hard to be strong. You don't have to be. He would want me to be strong. This made Aaron too angry to trust himself to speak. She said, I've been trying to tell you something since I've come here. And he had avoided her, letting her know in more ways than one that she needed to leave. He felt ashamed. His hands were empty. The orange rinds had fallen to the dirt. I'm sorry. I've been unbearable. Just scared. And there weren't even spiders involved. This was like her, the way her voice became light when something was hard. Please, he said. Tell me. I remembered more about my last day in the Imperial Palace than I said when I first joined your army. I thought that maybe it would hurt you if I said. Tell me anyway. You came to me in the palace music room. Yes, he remembered, his palm flat against the music room door, opening it, seeing her face go white. My father heard our conversation. He was listening in a secret room, one built for spying, hidden behind a screen in the shelves. Understanding gripped him. It all rushed sickeningly through his brain. The gesture of her slim hand lifted, trembling, toward him away as he stood on the threshold of the music room. He'd barreled ahead. She had told him to leave. He had come closer. I tried to warn you that he was there, Kestrel said. Nothing worked. She had reached for a pen and paper. A note, he realised now. She'd meant to write what she couldn't say out loud. He'd wrenched the pen from her hand and dashed it to the floor. This was how it must feel, he thought, to take a knife to the gut. Kestrel was talking rapidly now, voice unsteady. He hadn't come to spy on me, only to listen to me play. It was hard for us to talk with each other, easier to have an open secret between us. He would come and listen, and he could pretend that he wasn't really there. But I was happy to have him hear me. Then you opened the music room door. I remember how I felt. I didn't mean what I said. I was insulting. I'm sorry. Don't say that. Not to me. I failed you. I never trusted you enough to give you the chance to fail me, or not fail me. I am sorry. I was cruel, not only to protect you from my father. I wanted to protect myself, too. I couldn't bear for him to know. But what if I'd given up on all those secret ways to try to tell you he was hiding behind the screen? I could have just told you. I could have admitted to what I'd done and let him hear it. Yes, I agreed to marry the prince so that you could have your independence. Yes, I was Tenzin's spy. Yes, I loved you. There was a silence. Fireflies lit the distance. Why didn't I say that then? I wonder what would have happened if I had. And now, he wanted to ask, do you love me now? He felt her uncertainty. He felt as if it had already happened and he'd already asked, the damage of forcing the question. She spoke as if she'd heard it anyway. You are important to me, she said, and touched his face. Important. The word swelled and deflated. More than he'd thought, less than he wanted. But this, her touching him, how his blood jumped. He stayed very still. No more mistakes. He couldn't afford any. He would do nothing. Something. No. She found the curves of his closed eyelids, the shape of his nose, the divot above his mouth, the rasp along his jaw where he hadn't shaved. His skin began to dream, then his pulse, his flesh, right down to the bones. She shifted on the grass. Green and orange perfumed the air. It was on her skin. She tasted like it too, when her mouth brushed his, and their noses bumped awkwardly, and he wished he could see her as she breathed a laugh, and his hands went into her hair despite himself, despite what he'd told her the night before he'd left his home about what was enough and what wasn't. The tang of citrus on her tongue. He forgot himself. He moved her beneath him and felt their bodies mark the grass. A fluffy breeze stirred the heavy air, floating over the arch of his back. She tugged up his shirt and he went down onto his elbows. The hilt of her dagger dug into his belly. He stayed where he was, her palms warm water flowing over his skin. He didn't want to make a sound. Even his blood seemed loud as he kissed her. Then a campfire lit the near dark. Startled, he pulled away. He could see her face better now. Slow eyes, a blurry mouth, and a question stealing across her expression. He'd imagined this before, or something close to it. Close enough, he decided. But then had the sudden worry that if before she had come to him in his suite because she had wanted to remember, maybe this time, knowing what she knew now, he was just a way for her to forget. He pushed himself up. He heard a rustle as she sat up too, and wrapped her arms around her trousered knees. He kept his eyes off her. He straightened his shirt, but it felt odd, like it didn't fit him anymore. The sticky air cooled between them. He pushed damp hair off his brow. His limbs, so certain of themselves only moments ago, became an awkward jumble. Kestrel said, "Will you tell me about the day we met?" This was unexpected. It wasn't a nice day. I want to know everything, from then until now. Still unsure, Aaron said, "But you haven't before." I trust you. You won't lie to me. So he began to tell her, with a hesitancy that eventually steadied as the nearby campfire died down and the night surrendered fully to its creatures, the stinging insects, the almost soundless flap of bat wings, a breeze that flowed with the mellow scent of cooling earth. As he spoke, it seemed to him that this was really the only story he wanted to tell. He kept nothing from her. Somehow, they ended up lying down again, side by side, the grass dense beneath them as they talked. The moon above was large, yet intimate. Questions and answers were lifted out into the dark. Sometimes Kestrel recalled a moment Aaron described, and then it felt to Aaron as if he'd looked into a mirror and saw her instead of his own reflection. They talked long and late. Chapter 22. As they neared the first village on the outskirts of Erelith, Kestrel considered it. Why didn't she know what she felt for him? It shouldn't be hard to figure out. She knew enough, remembered enough of her past to guess the strength of the emotions she had hidden. Yet the tether between her and the past felt like it could snap with a mere twist. One memory ruled her mind. How her father had pushed her away from him as her heels skidded the floor and she begged. Aaron's horse, galled by something unseen, tossed its head. He muttered at the creature, crooned practically. Even at its roughest there always was a musical quality to his voice. Then glanced slantways through the sun at Kestrel. His brown hair fell over his scarred brow. They'd slept little the night before, but she didn't feel sleepy, not now as he regarded her. A thought etched itself in unreadable patterns across his face. There was a delay, and she grew nervous as she wondered whether what changed his expression was regret, and if it was regret, what did he regret? What they hadn't done last night, or the secrets they had shared. Some of what he'd said still made her hesitate, like his role in the Eastern fire that killed her friend Ronan. Even if Aaron hadn't intended her friend's death, even if, when he had learned of it, she had felt Aaron's regret, she knew that the regret was for her sake, not for Ronan. It was disorientating to be reminded of things she hadn't known she'd forgotten. To have a friend, a whole person, Ronan, rise up inside her, only to vanish. She remembered how she'd mourned him. She mourned him again. Kestrel held Aaron's gaze. She didn't break it as he held himself loose in his saddle. His body rocked slightly in rhythm with the stride of his horse. She wasn't sure she wanted him to speak now. His voice had the power to call whole memories into being. Even when he was silent, she was awake to the supple quality of his voice, grave, slow, gravelled, graceful. Clear, sometimes so transparent with feeling that she wondered how he had ever deceived her in those first few months in her household. With a voice like that, it shouldn't have been possible. He studied her. This, too, should be impossible. The way a kind of wonder tinged his expression, surprised, a little amused. Aaron reached across the narrow space between them. With a dusty finger, he briefly touched her nose. "You freckle in the sun," he said, and smiled. She felt suddenly light and sheer, as if this moment were encased in golden glass. Maybe love was easy, she thought. Maybe her past wasn't as vital as her present, she thought. But then she heard her father say that she'd broken his heart, and she could no longer believe that either thought was true. Aaron was against riding through the village. Kestrel heard him argue with the prince. Scouts had run ahead and learned that the general's army had seized, uncontested, an estate just south of Erelith. The Valorians would move north soon and fall on Erelith's farmlands. They'd butcher the sheep, seize grain, add another link in the supply chain running from Ithria Island, fortify themselves for a farther push north toward the city. "We need to position ourselves in the hills outside the estate," Aaron said. "Now." "What?" Roshar said. "Would you leave the village undefended?" "Of course not. Garrison a contingent. You don't need to parade the whole army down its streets." "The whole army? Not so. You forget, 3/4 of our forces lie at Lerillon. We brave few are all that stand between these villages and bloody dominion." Roshar sounded merry. "This is not a play," Arryn said through his teeth. Kestrel didn't understand Arryn's discomfort until the prince said, "Let them get a look at you." Even then, Kestrel didn't fully understand until she saw it happen. Although the Harani and Easterners usually marched in discrete brigades, Roshar gave orders for them to mingle. On the road outside the village, he took a personal artistic interest in arranging the visual appearance of, as he put it, friendship in the face of adversity, a phrase that made Arryn cringe. Roshar bullied Arryn into the front of the ranks alongside him. The prince caught Kestrel's eyes. She saw the gleam of strategy in his and responded to it. She held Javelin slightly back. They entered the village, Roshar and Arryn riding abreast. Villagers lined the main road, packed thickly. Small children lifted onto grown shoulders. When the villagers saw Arryn, their eyes widened with excitement. There was a murmur. People surged forwards. They tried to touch him. Arryn's horse didn't like it, and it huffed and stamped. Arryn hissed fiercely at Roshar in the Eastern tongue. It sounded like a curse. "If you're so worried they'll be trampled," Roshar drawled loudly in Harani, "get down off your horse and greet your people." Arryn glanced over his shoulder at Kestrel, a wordless plea. Then he dismounted and she lost sight of him in the sea of people. She drew Javelin up alongside Roshar. "What are you doing?" "Don't you think our boy deserves some love?" "I think you're using him to make yourself and your people look good by association." The prince smiled, spreading his hands helplessly. Kestrel dismounted and made her way through the villagers. She used her elbows, a few sharp words too, which drew surprised looks that quickly hardened into shock. She saw them see her Valorian features. Suspicion and hatred unfolded on their faces. They hadn't noticed her when she'd ridden with the army. Their eyes had been on Arryn, but they noticed her now. "Please let me through," she said. The press of bodies grew more solid. This wasn't the city where everyone knew about her. All the villagers knew was their own past engraved in her eyes, her hair, the shape of her face. Murder and oppression mixed right into the colour of her skin. "You," someone said, hard and flat. Wary, she backed away. People surrounded her. Someone from behind seized her hand. She yanked it free, pulse high and stuttering. She tried to turn, then heard, "Kestrel!" Arryn shouldered someone aside and reached for her hand again, gripping it firmly this time. She felt a rush of relief and foolishness for thinking to help Arryn and becoming the person who needed help. But the crowd's anger wasn't going away. If anything, it intensified. "What is she doing here?" Kestrel couldn't tell who'd said it. "She's my friend," Arryn answered. "Give her room." They did. It was strange to look at Arryn through her own eyes, and also through theirs, to see the real and imagined person, and to know that what they imagined him to be was true, even if it wasn't the whole truth. There was a solid command in his voice, his frame. There was the aura of Arryn's singularity, the way he seemed like no one else, like he was a little more than human. But there was also his anxiety, travelling through their interlaced fingers, and the hunted quality to his expression. His mouth wasn't right. She didn't think they saw that. "Stay with me," he murmured in her ear. Yes. With her beside him, he walked among the villagers. They kept touching him. Each time she felt the slight tremor of his reaction, quickly stilled. He tried to be at ease, yet mostly failed. She wasn't sure if the villagers noticed. They smiled, asked questions, voices riding high. Aaron didn't let go of her hand. At least he didn't let go until a woman pressed her swaddled infant against his chest. Awkward, quick, Aaron brought both arms up to hold the baby against his leather armour. He stared at the mother as if questioning her sanity. "Bless him," the woman said. "What?" "Bless him by your God." Aaron looked down at the cradled boy who slept, eyelids delicate, his cheeks round with health. A tiny flower of a hand peeked out of the swaddling. It flexed and curled against the cloth. Hoarsely, Aaron said, "My God." "Please." "But you don't know who I mean." "My God. It doesn't matter. If your God cares for my son the way he cares for you, that's all I want." Aaron's eyes flew to Kestrel's. "Is there any harm?" Kestrel asked, but still he wouldn't do it. Sternly, the mother told him, "You'll offend your God if you don't share his blessing." Aaron shifted the baby more securely against him. Fingers tentative, he touched the baby's brow. The child sighed. Aaron's face changed. He softened, grew luminous, the way certain early hours of certain days are pearled, quiet and rare. Kestrel seemed to feel with her own fingertips the baby's fresh skin beneath Aaron's touch. The baby opened his eyes. They were Harani grey. Aaron murmured words too low for Kestrel to hear. Then he settled the baby into the waiting arms of the mother, who appeared satisfied. She made the Harani gesture of thanks, which Aaron returned. There was something about the way he did it that reminded Kestrel that the gesture could mean an apology as well. Aaron's hand found hers again. He felt slightly unfamiliar. Something had changed between them. She knew why it changed her to see Aaron hold this child. She understood the question that had opened inside her, but she was unprepared. She hadn't thought of this. Her heart raced with an emotion too complicated for either fear or happiness. She released Aaron's hand. "Ready to go back?" Her voice didn't match how she felt. It was cool, even careless. She realised that this particular voice was perhaps her most treasured armour. Aaron's expression closed. Yes. The crowd cleared a path for them. They returned to their horses and mounted. "See," Roshar said. "Wasn't that fun?" Aaron looked ready to shove the prince off his horse. The army moved from the road into a meadow that swelled into hills. It was near misery for the horses that dragged the light cannon and supply wagons, but Roshar wanted the high ground. Kestrel wanted the cover of the forest edging the higher hills, as well as the proximity to Erelith's manor with its fortified walls, visible, but a day's ride away. Aaron didn't say what he wanted. He said little of anything. A stream swivelled down through the meadow, a clear rill bordered by tufted grass. The air pulsed with the sound of cicadas. Roshar called a halt. Kestrel let Javelin drink and dropped to her knees beside him, cupping water to her mouth, down her sweaty neck. Delicious chill. "The water," she said to no one in particular. Her father would want this estate for its abundant fresh water, even more than for the stores behind the manor walls, or for the sheep ranging the hilltops. This much water this far south was a prize. Aaron's horse nosed past her to reach the stream. She looked up, expecting to see its rider, but Aaron wasn't there. She found him sitting far off on a knoll overlooking the slopes that curved and gentled down. The village sat in the distance, like a grey pebble. Arryn glanced up as she approached. One tree shadowed the knoll, a larran tree, leaves broad and glossy. Their shadows dappled Arryn's face, made it a patchwork of sun and dark. It was hard to read his expression. She noticed for the first time the way he kept the scarred side of his face out of her line of sight. Or rather, what she noticed for the first time was how common this habit was for him in her presence, and what that meant. She stepped deliberately around him, and sat so that he had to face her fully or shift into an awkward neck-craned position. He faced her, his brow lifted, not so much in amusement as in his awareness of being studied and translated. "Just a habit," he said, knowing what she'd seen. "You have that habit only with me." He didn't deny it. "Your scar doesn't matter to me, Arryn." His expression turned sardonic and interior, as if he were listening to an unheard voice. She groped for the right words, worried that she'd get this wrong. She remembered mocking him in the music room of the Imperial Palace. "I wonder what you believe could compel me to go to such epic lengths for your sake. Is it your charm? Your breeding? Not your looks, surely." "It matters because it hurts you," she said. "It doesn't change how I see you. You're beautiful. You always have been to me." Even when she hadn't realised it, even in the market nearly a year ago, then later, when she understood his beauty, again when she saw his face torn, stitched, fevered, on the tundra when his beauty terrified her. Now too. Her throat closed. The line of his jaw hardened. He didn't believe her. "Arryn, I'm sorry for what happened in the village." She dropped her hand to her lap. She hadn't been conscious of lifting it. "That shouldn't have happened," Arryn said. The crowd's anger toward her had been unsettling, but not surprising. It wasn't only that troubled him. "What exactly did happen? With the mother and her baby?" He tunnelled fingers through his hair and rubbed the heel of his hand against his brow. "A misapprehension." "That you're God-touched?" Kestrel had heard the rumours. "No, that's true, I am." She stared. "But I don't think the mother would be happy if she knew which god." He glanced at her, catching her surprise. "My 20th name day was on the winter solstice, the start of a new Harani year. But I'm older than that by the way Valorians reckon time. I was born nearly 2 full seasons before. My mother waited to name me. It was her right. The priests didn't agree. The name day is meant to celebrate not only the baby, but also the mother's recovery. Women recover differently, so the mother decides when. But in the year I was born, each new mother found a reason to wait until the year turned. You know, don't you, the way we mark time? Each year belongs to one god in the pantheon of the 100. Each 100 years measures an era. The sign of each god rules once every 100 years. My year, my birth year, belonged to the god of death." "Arryn," she said slowly, seeing his anxiety. "Do you think you're cursed?" He shook his head. "Your mother named you in the following year. That's your year then, isn't it? Harani celebrate the name day, not the birthday. It shouldn't matter when you were born." "It matters." "Why?" "My whole family. I survived. There's a reason." "Arryn, I didn't know then that I was marked. Arryn, the only reason for what you suffered is that my father is a monster and he wanted your country. It's not so simple. I hear the god of death in my head. He advises me, comforts me. Kestrel wasn't sure what to believe. I don't know what his blessing means, Arryn said. Do you see? When I look at what happened to me, what I've done, what I do, his favour is hard. Maybe the voice you hear is your own, she said gently, and you just don't recognise it. He made no reply. She didn't like his belief that death had marked him. His fear and pleasure troubled her. A deep alien satisfaction lurked in his eyes. Isn't it possible that you've made this up without meaning to? I'm his. I know it. And the baby in the village? Arryn winced. It would have been a sin to deny the mother. I couldn't. You understand, don't you? I should have told her, but if I had and she withdrew her request, that might catch the god's attention. And what might he do then? If she'd known it was the god of death, she never would have asked. Kestrel tried to set aside his intricate understanding of cause and effect. It felt beyond her, and dangerous, operating on the whims of an unpredictable deity. The mother knew whose blessing she sought, she said. It can't be that hard to guess your age, give or take a year. Which god ruled your name year? Sowing. She squinted, then laughed. He smiled a little, yet said, You shouldn't laugh. She laughed harder. Actually, I sew quite well. Perhaps, but you don't exactly seem like the god of sewing's chosen one. The baby's mother knew what she asked for. The wind stirred the tree. Shadows moved in patterns around them. Kestrel's heart was in her throat, even before she knew what she'd say. Would you do what your mother did? Would you delay the naming of your child for the favour of one god or another? There was a startled silence. My child. Arryn tried the words, exploring them. She heard in his voice what she'd seen on his face in the village as he'd held the baby. She looked at the tree. It was a tree. A leaf, a leaf. Some things just are. They don't signal other meanings. They aren't like a god casting its meaning over an entire year, or like a conversation, which is itself and also all the things that aren't said. Her swift heart scurried along. It wouldn't be up to me, he said finally. It would be my wife's choice. She met his eyes. He touched her hot cheek. A tree was not a tree, a leaf not a leaf. She understood what he didn't say. She stood. Come, the stream is amazing. Aren't you thirsty? Your horse has better sense than you. A smile. Teasing. A little shy, too, yet discovering a newfound safety in showing shyness. She held out her hand. He took it. The army camped in the forest on the height of the hills outside Erelith's manor. Another stream coursed through the trees, wide and rough. It fed over rocks and went down deep. Kestrel went with the women soldiers to bathe. She thought about Sarzine, wishing she had the woman's steady, clear way of seeing things. With a twinge of guilt, Kestrel realised that Sarzine had no way of knowing how or why Kestrel had disappeared from Arryn's house. Kestrel had been incapable of leaving any word behind, and now it was too late. A message, no matter how obliquely worded, could be intercepted and understood. She imagined her father discovering exactly where she was. Her stomach shrank. So instead, she thought about what she'd say to Sarzine when she returned to the city. I missed you, she'd say. I never thanked you for what you did for me." She chucked her clothes onto the grass. She needed to feel the water on her skin. It was freezing. She ducked under, opened her eyes and looked up through the wavering water at the blue and yellow sky. The cold made her remember that her father must have held her once, the way Arryn had held the baby. She held her breath and treaded hard to keep her weight below the surface. It was cold, but the light was beautiful, broken and blurred by the water's rippled silk, as if the sky wasn't simply the sky, but a whole other world. Magic, possible, just within reach. She washed her clothes and didn't wait for them to dry fully before putting them back on. She wrung out her hair and braided it. Wending between the trees, she stepped noiselessly, finding moss or dirt or stone for her feet, never leaves or twigs. "You walk well," her father had said once. "Being quiet is hardly a requisite skill for battle, father." "You could be a ranger," he'd insisted, but this was after a spectacularly bad training session he'd watched. Her with a sword, the captain of her father's personal guard screaming at her. She knew her father didn't believe his own hope. His voice echoed in her head, and her heart cramped. It felt as if she were underwater again, with someone holding her below the surface. She shoved the memory away. There was only so much she could bear to remember. A game. Make a game of it. How silently can you walk? Let's see. Toe, not heel. Tree root. This patch of earth, darker and therefore soft. Spears of sun pierced through the trees. Her damp braid bounced between her shoulder blades. But there was no one to witness her silence. No one to say, "You walk well." Although Kestrel understood the pleasure of doing something for herself alone, had played the piano for hours for her own ears, and to feel the stretch and jump of her fingers, the reach of her long arms, she also knew what it was like to play for someone. It makes a difference. It's hard not to want to be heard, seen, to share. A twig lay in her path. She paused, then deliberately stomped it. Crack. "Pity," the voice echoed in the quiet clearing. "You were doing so nicely." Roshar. Her eyes found him several paces away, leaning against a tree, watching her. She approached. There was blood on him. "Sometimes, little ghost, you remind me of my sister," he said. Her brows shot up. He laughed. "Not that one." Kestrel wasn't sure what connection he saw between her and Risha. Because his younger sister was a hostage in the imperial court? Maybe. "Whose blood?" She tipped her chin in the direction of his spattered forearms. "A Valorian scout. About your size. I came looking for you. Thought you might like to try her armor. Stylish, light, very Valorian. Good condition, nary a scratch in the leather." "What about the scout?" "Hard to catch, harder to subdue." She gave him a level look. Roshar tugged a cropped ear. "She's alive." "When that scout doesn't report back, the general will know we're here." "All the more reason to find out what she knows." "Don't press her." "Kestrel," he said quietly, "the blood is from the fight when we captured her, not torture." "So you won't?" "Now, it would be nice if information fell out of the sky. Given that it doesn't, it is still, nevertheless, comforting that certain people do horrible things so that other people don't have to. We should be grateful to such people. Or we should at least not ask questions when we don't want answers." She can't help us. Valorian scouts operate in relays. She doesn't report directly to the General's camp, but to a station between there and here. An officer remains at the station and sends hawks with coded messages back to the main camp, which keeps the scout from knowing too much. She won't know how the General's army might have shifted in formation, or what the conditions there are. She won't know the codes. Roshar tilted his head, regarding her. Do you know the codes? Kestrel nudged her memory. It pushed back. I might have, she said slowly. Once. I'm sure this scout knows something useful. There's no point torturing her for information she doesn't have. Let her be. His expression was difficult to read. I'll do as you wish, he said finally. For now. Thank you. He slouched against a tree. Do you forgive me for earlier? That piece of pageantry in the village? I'm not the one you should be asking. It's good for Arryn. Good for you, too. His black eyes met hers. You want to win? Yes. If Arryn is admired and my people are trusted, does that help or hurt? Help, she acknowledged. Come try your armour. I think it'll fit. Arryn came into Roshar's tent just as the prince tightened the last buckle on Kestrel's armour. Arryn was shaven, his hair wet. Whatever he was going to say died on his lips. Aren't you pleased? Roshar said. Arryn immediately left, dropping the flap of the tent's opening behind him. Kestrel found him by his fire at the edge of the camp. It had grown late. He'd pitched his tent on the outskirts. She realised that at each day's end he'd been setting his tent farther from everyone else. He fed the fire. She crouched beside him, the leather armour creaking. He flinched at the sound. I'm sorry, he said finally. It's hard to look at you like that. I'm still me, she said, and was surprised at herself for trying to convince him that no matter how she seemed to change, she remained the same person. This wasn't her usual line of argument. As she thought about how she looked in Valorian armour, and whether she looked like herself or not, a germ of an idea began to grow. Promise me you'll stay out of harm's way, he said. I don't want you on the battlefield. It's not fair of you to ask that, when you'd never do the same. The risk is different for you and me. She became angry. Why? Because you're God-touched? Because you're good with a sword and I'm not? That's part of it. That matters less than you think. People who are good at fighting die in war all the time, and people who aren't can find ways to win. Her idea, the armour, the Valorian scout, a plan, took shape. Kestrel's anger carved its details and made it perfect. Yes, Arryn said, but even so, the risk for you is still different. Stop saying that. It is. His face was unhappy. There is a difference between you and me. If I die, you'll survive. If you die, it will destroy me. Her shoulders sagged. She couldn't bear his hollow expression. The anger drained from her. Please, he said. Promise me. You'll still play a role. Tell Roshar and me what to do and we'll listen, but not the battlefield. You're to stay safe. Slowly she nodded. Swear. I won't be part of the battle. I give you my word. She moved to leave. She'd not gone 2 paces before he stood directly in her path. His eyes were narrow. A trick. She spread her open hands. You asked, I swore. We're done. You swore very specifically. I need for you to promise. You'll stay off the battlefield and be safe. Say it. I beg you. I'll make no promises to you that you won't make to me. She pushed past him. Chapter 23. She entered Roshar's tent. I need your help. Blinking, he propped himself up on his bed. He said groggily, And I need a real door with a lock. I have an idea. I don't know you all that well, and still hearing you say that makes me very, very worried. Listen to me. If I do, can I go back to sleep? Being a fearless leader is exhausting. It's about the Valorian scout. You said she was useless. In terms of what she can tell us, but if we play things right, her capture will be to our advantage. Roshar was fully awake now. Go on. The general is in his position with his troops at the estate they captured. A scout station is set between his position and a target. An officer remains at that station with message hawks. Meanwhile, scouts run from the station to evaluate the enemy, then report back to the station. The officer sends a coded message by hawk to the general, so if a scout's captured, she can't share much with the enemy, and since scouts get close to the target, they can't launch a hawk. Too visible to us. We might shoot it down, then track and capture the scout. That Valorian you caught spying on us can't tell us any codes and won't be able to say much about the general's forces. But she will know the location of the relay station and to whom she reports. You want us to hunt down and extract information from the officer? She shook her head. Something better. Pray tell, little ghost. Send me in her place. He stared. Kestrel said, I'll pretend to be her. Please understand. When I look at you as if you're crazy, it's not that I judge you for your insanity. I fit in her armor. I'm her size. I'm Valorian. You don't look like her. Just because you're Valorian doesn't mean the officer at the relay station won't notice that you're a completely different person. It's night. I can report to the officer while keeping my distance. I'm going back to sleep. Wake me when you're sane. Impatiently, Kestrel said, What colour is her hair? Different. How different? Brownish. All right, maybe not that different from yours in the dark, but I'll braid my hair like hers, wear everything she wore. Did you search her pockets? She'll have a token. Sometimes the general sends an officer to relieve the one at the station. Then the new officer and a scout, and there are many of these scouts, not just the one reporting to a station, present a token to confirm their identity. We might get lucky. There might be a new officer at the station, one who's never seen the scout but knows her only by name. Roshar, no one would expect someone in your army to impersonate a Valorian scout. Normally it wouldn't be possible. Not for an Easterner, not for a Harani. What if the Valorians know you're with us? That stationed officer might be aware of it. If my father knows, he'll do his best to keep it hidden from as many people as possible. Why? There was a lump in her throat. He's ashamed of me. It would shame him for others to know. Roshar settled back into the bed, arms folded. What would we gain if you pretended to be the Valorian scout? Misinformation. Let's assume the general knows of our presence here. If he doesn't, he will soon enough. The issue isn't whether he'll attack, it's how. I can influence that. I'll say you have a light force, which other Valorian scouts, if they're eyeing us, will confirm. But I'll also say that I overheard plans that you'll entrench yourselves in Erelith's manor. Roshar was already off the bed, leafing through the maps spread out on the table in the tent's centre. He'd take the main road then, Kestrel said. He wouldn't expect resistance along the way, or at most he'd expect stealth attacks by small bands of soldiers, there to strike and run, to whittle away at him, like by burning the supply wagons. Nothing serious, nothing he couldn't handle, nothing that would stop him from taking the easiest and most obvious way to Erelith. There are hills along the main road outside the estate. I can set our forces on either side. Use the guns. They have a longer range than crossbows. If you position the gunners far enough away, they can shoot without ever being touched by Valorian fire. I'm sorry I said you were crazy, little ghost. Kestrel remembered how it felt to lose to her father at Bite and Sting, at Borderlands, at anything he chose to play. The dig at her pride. A hurt certainty that she'd never be able to prove herself to him. Embarrassment for wanting to prove herself. She remembered her hands clinging to his jacket, her whole self reduced to 2 claws as she pleaded with him. War wasn't a game, but she wanted badly to make her father know how it felt to lose. Roshar said, "Tell me what you need." A horse. Javelin might be recognised. Probably not. I don't intend for the horse to be seen, but better not risk it. And I want to get there while it's still dark. Scouts run on foot, so I'll have to tether the horse at a distance from the station. As for the station, you'll need the location. And the scout's gear. Roshar clicked his teeth. A chastising sort of sound. The gear is easy. If you want the location of the scouts' camp, we need to revisit our conversation this afternoon about not-so-nice means of extracting valuable information. Don't. I don't enjoy it, but she's not likely to tell us just because we ask nicely. You can't. He drew an impatient breath, and she knew what he'd say. Knew the arguments, the costs and benefits. She knew that Roshar, with his mutilated face, understood what it was like to be subjected to pain. She wanted to say all this before he did, and to find a convincing reason that he was wrong. There was no reason she thought he'd accept. She couldn't think of another way. Then she did. Don't do it. Trick her instead. Roshar squinted. Explain. When Valorians enlist, they do so partly because of friendships. There are lovers in a camp. Even without that, there's a sense of belonging. People you'd die for and do anything to protect. She'll have someone she cares about among the scouts. Take her token, cast it with a mould, a bit of soap maybe, or wax. Melt down metal to match the token and make a new one. Return hers, show her the other one. Say you found its mate on another scout who claims to be her friend. Promise to torture her fellow scout if she doesn't give up the location of the officer. She might care more about the officer than this other scout. Try. He shrugged, then nodded. I hope that in your bag of delightful schemes you have one for how to deal with Aaron. No. Dear ghost, he will tie you and me up and dump us both into a very deep hole before he allows you to do what you plan to do. No more allowing, Kestrel said, and no more lies. Chapter 24. Aaron woke to the sound of screams. He shoved out of his tent and into the night, but the camp was calm, undisturbed, though soldiers near their fires seemed to have stopped in mid-conversation to eye the tent from which the screams came, and then choked off into a sob. Arryn asked the whereabouts of the prince and was directed to a nearby tree, where Roshar leaned over the bound Valorian scout, hissing a threat too low for Arryn to understand. The Valorian girl, just a girl, Arryn saw, younger than Kestrel, had her eyes squeezed shut. She strained back against the tree, bare heels digging into the dirt and moss. She wore an Eastern tunic and trousers. A bandage on her arm was rusted with blood. She opened her eyes, glazed with fear, darting all over, skittering across Arryn's face as he froze. How wide they were, how dark, how like the eyes of the woman he'd killed on the ship. Another scream broke the night. It came again from the tent. Arryn strode to the prince. "Roshar, a word?" "I was wondering when you'd joined the fun," the prince answered in Valorian. He grinned at the girl. "I'll be back." When they were out of earshot of the scout, Roshar dropped his smile. "To be clear, this was Kestrel's idea. What the hell are you doing?" "Faking a torture." Arryn thought he understood and calmed down a little. "Is it working?" "It might, if you don't interrupt again." "Let me know if you learn something." "Of course. Where's Kestrel?" "She wants to be alone right now," Roshar said after a slight pause. "Better let her be." But Roshar's tone made Arryn remember how the prince had smiled at him, the reins of 2 horses in his hands on the grounds of Arryn's home. This made him think of Kestrel's refusal earlier, before nightfall, to make him any promises. Ever since the sun had gone down, Arryn's nerves had tightened with anxiety, even as he'd warned himself not to push things, to be different from how he usually was, to not overreact or feel too much or say too much. Let her be, he told himself, exactly as Roshar was telling him now. But another scream rose in the distance, and even though Arryn knew that this was a trick, it was Kestrel's trick. Her tricks tended to be shaped like a nest, each twig and straw in place, hiding a dangerous creature Arryn never saw until it was too late. Arryn said, "Where is she?" Reluctantly, the prince said, "She hasn't left yet." "Left? What? Where?" "Ask her. She'll tell you. Against my better judgment, I might add." Roshar nodded in the direction of his tent. Arryn took one rapid stride toward it. The prince's hand came down hard on his shoulder. "Arryn, her plan is a good plan." Arryn shrugged off his grip and walked away. He found her sitting on Roshar's cot, lacing up high Valorian boots. She wore trousers, the scout's trousers. Kestrel had bound her breasts with tight cloth. Her midriff was bare, her shoulders and arms too, skin a dark gold fired by the lamplight. She'd heard him enter, yet kept her head down, ignoring him, her braid hanging heavily over one shoulder. It swayed slightly as she jerked laces over the boot's hooks and cinched them. When she reached for the Valorian tunic and jacket on the cot beside her, he caught the trace of a mottled line on her shoulder, saw the lash that curled up over her neck. She paused. Had she heard the sore thump of his heart, or the way he'd swallowed, caught in the nightmare of those scars, in the memory of seeing them for the first time, in his awful imagining of how they'd been made? She stood and turned her back to him. Just before she drew the tunic over her head, he saw almost the full maze of marks, white and raised. She put on the earth-coloured jacket. All the scout's clothing dyed to match the woods. "Kestrel!" His voice was rough. She faced him and told him her plan. When he started to argue, He couldn't even hear what he said. His pulse was shuddering, the blood draining from him. She said, "Trust me." He did. He wanted to say so, then realised that he didn't, that he could not and would not if trusting her meant this. No. She was angry now, too. "You can't keep me in a cage. I'm not." Yet that was what he meant to do, in a way. Even as he saw the wrongness of that, he couldn't imagine letting her go. "It's too dangerous," she shrugged. "Why do you insist on risking yourself? You were caught once, you're not infallible. Are you trying to prove that you are?" "No." "Are you trying to punish me?" "No." "I deserve it, I know, but this isn't about you. You are going to get caught." "I don't think so. You'll be killed. Worse. I can't." "Yes, you can. You had better." "Why?" "Because this is me." Her eyes were wet. "This is the sort of person I've always been." He wanted to tell her that wasn't true. "You remember wrong," he could say, and this time he'd be the one who was a good liar. Kestrel said, "I want to be like her." "No, you don't," he'd persuade, even though he'd never been able to bear the way she thought of herself as two people. Not like her at all. His stomach curled. "Am I the only one who's supposed to worry?" she asked. "As I did when you went to sea? As I will tomorrow, every day after that? You can worry for me like I worry for you." He looked at his hands. They trembled. "Trust me," she repeated. He felt the misery of his fear, the desperate certainty that he would lose her again. He trusted that certainty. He trusted his fear. It ruled him like a god. "Arryn." He met her eyes. They were strange and familiar, rich in his mind with everything he knew about her and with the mystery of her thoughts, which he'd never know for sure. He saw, the knowledge cracked open his shell of fear, that death wasn't the only way to lose her. He would lose her if he couldn't do this. He didn't trust her. He did not. Yet he understood that there are some things you feel and others that you choose to feel, and that the choice doesn't make the feeling less valid. "Do you?" she asked. He made his choice. "Yes." She stepped into his arms. He held the rope of her braid gently. He was drowning. He was far below the surface. He'd forgotten how to breathe. Then his lungs opened, and his mind grew quiet and clear. "Come back to me," he murmured. "I will." Chapter 25. She rode hard, crouching low over the saddle. Kestrel pressed the horse to a gallop, drove it straight down the main road from Erilith to the south. The map was in her mind. She saw again the shaky mark made on a forest 2 leagues from the general's camp. Roshar had brought the map to her with the scout's token. And now, the clatter of hooves, a cream of sweat on the horse's neck, wan moonlight. Hard to see pits and cracks in the road. If the horse stumbled at this pace, it'd shatter a bone, toss its rider. Kestrel would break her neck on the paving stones. She dug her heels in. She had mere hours before the sky blued and lightened. There'd be no chance then to pretend to be the scout. Black trees jolted and wavered on either side of the road. Her throat was dry. Sweat salted her lips. She remembered Arryn's hand slipping down the length of her braid, letting go, the way he'd looked at her. The trees gave way abruptly to grass and seemed to topple back, crash noiselessly behind her as she sped forward. The horse's stride lengthened along the meadow. It felt like she rode over a black sea. A smudge of trees in the distance. West. Off the road now, slower, cantering over the meadow toward the western forest. She let the horse walk, felt its sides bellow and heave against her legs. Low branches to duck under. Watch the knees. The trees grew closer together. No path here. Straining to see through different shades of shadow, Kestrel picked her way through the woods until it didn't make sense any more to ride. It was when she tethered the horse. There was no sound of fresh water, and that was cruel. She hated to leave the horse like that, neck drooping, coat furred with sweat, that Kestrel first felt it. A slow fear, heavy like sadness, which made her realise that her fear was a kind of sadness, because she couldn't be better than her fear. She had believed that she could be better when she stood before Arryn and demanded that he trust her. When she felt, finally, the truth of his trust, warm and solid in his long limbs. But this was how it ended. Her alone, stepping through the woods, afraid. She paused, tipped her head back, and glanced up at the sharp stars. "See how brave they are," whispered the memory of her father's voice. She'd been very young when he'd said this. Bright and still. Those stars are the kind of soldiers who stand and fight. A rush of anger. Even the stars. "Don't just stand there," she told herself. "Run!" She jogged through the trees, her breath rasped. She abandoned what she'd been feeling and thought only of the mark on the map and reaching it while it was still dark. It was the owl's hour. One last loop of the night, a final hunt before dawn crept in. Kestrel slowed. Her legs were jelly. She drank from the canteen strapped over one shoulder and across her chest, swished and spat. Her bad knee throbbed a little, but she realised, distantly, curiously, that her body had grown strong. The days of riding had hardened her legs. It felt good to run. But her strength also reminded her of her weakness, of how easily her body had given out on the tundra, the unlocking of the prison gate. Relief, joy, then the chase. Legs collapsing, mud, rope, the dress ripped open along her spine. Kestrel capped the canteen, screwed it. She ran again. The sky was dark blue when she saw a flicker of orange in the trees, an oil lamp. Her heart hit her ribs. She slowed her run, moving towards the clearing. The lamplight swung. She'd been heard. "Hail!" she tried to call as she threaded through the last copse of trees, her sides heaving. She had no breath. She coughed and tried again. "Hail, Emperor Lycian! General of Wolves, father of 100,000 children." It was his military title as well as his political one. Though the Emperor hadn't fought in a war since the conquest of Heron, he retained his rank as First General, the only person to whom her father must answer. "Alice?" called the voice behind the uplifted lamp. "Stay back, sir. You sound strange." Kestrel dug out the token. "Catch!" She flipped it into the air and heard the man snag it, or heard, rather, the nothingness of the coin not hitting earth. The lamp moved closer. Kestrel couldn't see the features of the man who held it, only his tall, broad form as he approached. Kestrel coughed. "No, please stay where you are, sir. I'm sick." "Come to my tent, then, and report there. Rest." "It's a disease. Something Eastern. The barbarians brought it. I might infect you." The officer's boots came to a gritty halt. "What kind of disease?" "It starts with a cough." Kestrel hoped it'd explain any difference in voice. "Then pustules. The sores weep. I hadn't realised that one of the wagons held bodies. I'd crept close to their camp and looked inside the supplies to see how well fortified they were. It felt strange to speak in Valorian again. The rebels mean to withstand a siege. They have plague bodies to launch over the walls of Erilith Manor. They'll infect us when we attack. They seem to be immune. You need a physician. He sounded genuinely concerned. We can quarantine you. Please, let me continue to do what I can for our victory. Kestrel conjured the ghost of her very young self as she spoke. She remembered that little girl, so eager to be her father's warrior. She spoke with that girl's voice. As long as I can stay on my feet, I can still scout. I want to. Let me bring glory to the Empire. He hesitated, then said, The glory is yours, which were the traditional words offered when a soldier accepted a mission almost certain to end in death. The Valorian officer shifted in the shadows and was quiet. The sky appeared to grow a little lighter, but Kestrel told herself that it was her imagination, that the sky couldn't possibly do that in the span of 2 heartbeats. She was letting anxiety rule her. Your report, then, the officer said. Tell me their numbers. 1,000 soldiers, maybe 1,500. Roshar's force near Erilith numbered nearly twice that amount. Components? Little cavalry, mostly infantry. True. From the looks of it, young. True. Inexperienced. Not true. Light cannon and not many of them. True, unfortunately. Some tension between the Dakran and Harani factions. Less than she'd expect. Tension over who should command. Not true. Not exactly. Sometimes, though, she caught the way the prince eyed Arryn with pensive hesitancy, as if he secretly believed Arryn to be a wholly other creature than human, that a day would come when Arryn's skin would split and whatever was lurking inside him would climb out. In fact, most people looked at him that way. Position? The officer asked. By now they'll have reached the manor. Tell me about the formation of their units, their positions within the army. Kestrel answered, relieved. He seemed to believe her. This was easier than she'd thought. She mixed her lies and truths, setting them down like planks of joined wood, sturdy enough to bear the weight of this man's trust. But when she stopped speaking, the silence lasted longer than it should have. Alice, said the officer, where are you from? She pretended to misunderstand the question. Sir, I came from the rebels' camp. That's not what I mean. Where are you from? Her confidence vanished. He suspected her. She didn't know anything of the scout's history. Kestrel had taken the token and the map and had left as quickly as she could. Carefully, Kestrel told the officer, I thought you already knew. Remind me. The lamplight was strong enough that he'd see if she began to inch a hand toward her dagger. She stayed still. Gambling, she told him. I'm a colonial girl. The odds were with her. Almost all of Valoria was a colony. But from where, exactly? She coughed again, making the sound murky and wet, and tried to think. From here. Scouts deployed in Heron would have to know the language, ideally the terrain too. The scout, Alice, had been young, Roshar had said. Green to be so easily caught. If the general chose someone with little experience to gather intelligence on the enemy, it must be because she had advantages that outweighed her inexperience, such as familiarity with the country. I'm from here too, the officer said softly. Yes, sir. Her heart sped. I spent my youth on a farm west of here. He took a step closer. She held her ground. He wasn't close enough yet to see her clearly, She couldn't see him clearly, but she caught now the slight accent in his voice. She would have had a colonial accent too, if her father hadn't ordered her tutors to hammer any sign of it from her voice. In Valorian, she possessed the voice of a capital courtier, polished and pure. "I want my home back," the officer said. "So do I." She kept her voice low, rough from coughing, but added a subtle lilt, just enough that he might think the accent had been there all along, and that he'd somehow missed it. "What are my orders?" She tried to keep the question steady. Her pulse was relentless. "Return to your post. I'll inform the general of your report." "Yes, sir." The words came out in a relieved rush. "Not quite yet." The officer set the lamp down on the forest floor and backed away. "Pick up the lamp." Dread mounted in her throat. "Sir?" "Pick up the lamp and show me your face." "But," she swallowed, "the infection." "I want to see it. I'll keep my distance." "The risk." "Soldier, pick up the lamp. Show me your face." "Trust me," she told Arryn. She remembered the strength in her voice and tried to summon that strength again. She thought fleetingly that this must be what memory was for, to rebuild yourself when you lose the pieces. Slowly, Kestrel walked toward the lamp. She kept her head down, though she didn't think he could see her face yet. She'd seen nothing of his during the moment after he'd set the lamp at his feet, just before he'd backed away. She closed one eye, an old trick her father had taught her for night fighting that involved torches or lamps. One eye adjusted to see by torchlight, one eye kept in reserve to see in total darkness if the light went out. "I don't want anyone to see me," she told the officer. "The disease has ruined my face." "Show me, now." She grabbed the lamp and smashed it against a boulder. He swore. Her dagger was in her hand. She heard him draw his sword. "I don't want to kill," she'd told Arryn long ago. Even if she'd wanted to, she'd fail. She felt the memory of failure, of her father watching while she couldn't fight back, her arm sagging beneath the pressure of someone else's sword. "Who are you?" He advanced, his blade probing the shadows, darting, cautious, blind. His sight hadn't yet adjusted, but it would. The officer would capture her and bring her to the general's camp. There'd be questions. She'd be made to answer. Pressed, split open along her weakest lines. She thought of the prison, her twilight drug, mud and agony. She imagined her father's face as she was brought before him. She saw it in her memory, her future. She saw it right now. Pulse wild, stomach tight, she crouched to grasp a handful of soil. He heard her and turned. She flung the grit into his face. "A dirty trick," she heard her father say. "Dishonourable." But dirty tricks were her speciality. She darted around the man, came up behind him and slid the dagger's tip into his back, just below the ribs. "Which code do you use to communicate with the general? Tell me." "Never." She dug a little harder. "I'll kill you." He hooked her leg around hers and jerked hard. She toppled, hit the ground. She scrambled to get up and found a sword's point at her throat. "My turn to ask questions." The officer kicked the dagger from her hand. A bird sang. Morning was coming. Kestrel was dimly aware of this, and of the horse she had tethered and now would never untether. She imagined Arryn, who wouldn't be sleeping. He'd be watching the sky and the road. She felt the grass beneath his hand, damp with summer dew. Half sitting, half crouching, she backed shakily away from the sword. It followed. An Axinax sword. She recognised the shorter blade, favoured for fighting in forests. She shrank from it, felt a sharp rock dig into her back, and thought, oddly, of the piano. A whole passage burst into her mind, one that she hadn't played in years, but had loved for its dramatic swings from high to low registers. She had liked to cross her right hand over and drive the sound down into darkness. She didn't have to stretch hard. Although Kestrel was small, she had long hands, long arms. Very good reach. She groped the forest floor behind her and curled her fingers around the jagged rock that poked into her back. She swung it, smashing the man's hand where he held the sword's hilt. He made a terrible sound. The sword fell. Its tip glanced off her thigh, slicing through her trousers. It struck the earth. Pain seared down her leg. But she was up. Her fisted rock crunched into the man's face, his head dented. Her fingers were greasy and warm. Liquid ran under the leather of her forearm guard. He thudded down. She dropped the rock. The birds were mad. There was a whole chorus of them now. Her thigh was hot, sticky. There was something meaty on her fingernails. Her hand was a glove of blood. "I don't want to kill," she had told Aaron. She slid into the memory and saw herself sitting in her music room across from Aaron. An open window sighed on its hinges. Warm autumn air. Bite and sting tiles, all face up. Her hands were shaking. She was going to come apart. And if you do? Her plan was already in near ruins. Salvage the situation, then. Look at the body. Go on. Make certain he's dead. He was. Now yourself. Look. Kestrel peeled back the torn flap of cloth at her thigh. Blood seeped. It hurt. But she thought that maybe it wasn't too bad. Her leg could bear her weight. She wiped her bloody hand in the dirt. The tent, she told herself. Go! She walked unsteadily to the officer's small tent and entered. A pallet, a caged messenger hawk, hooded, sleeping. A stool set before a table that bore papers, a pen, an inkstand, and a set of counters. The papers. She went for them, snatching a page. Then she dropped it, her stomach roiling when she realised that it was a letter the dead man had been writing to his mother. Keep looking, she told herself. Forget his broken face. She examined each page in the small pile, searching for any scrap of a coded message between the officer and her father. Since the military used several different codes, she had to find evidence of which one the officer had been using. Maybe she'd recognise it, remember, decode it. But there was no evidence, only the letter to his mother and blank pages. She limped back outside and saw in the rising dawn the man's crushed brow, the jelly of one eye. She swallowed hard, then searched the man and found his seal. Relief. The seal could be useful. But there was no coded message. She had hoped to try to fake a report from the officer to her father. An impossible thought. A stupid one. She didn't know the code, didn't even know the dead man's name. She wanted to bury her face in her hands. She returned to the tent and sank down onto the stool. Blood leaked from the cut on her leg. She should bandage it. She had no bandage. The hawk flexed its claws around its perch, shifting its weight with a scratchy, rustling sound. She glanced at it, feeling close to frustrated despair. Then her gaze fell to the counters, beads of wood that slid along skinny steel rods in their wooden frame, used for accounting. Kestrel touched a bead. A memory unfolded inside her. She unscrewed the pot of ink and found a blank sheet of paper. Glancing at the officer's letter to his mother, Kestrel got a feel for how to imitate the man's handwriting. She inked her pen and composed the first line of code. Chapter 26. The horse trudged up the hill to the camp, its head hanging. The sun had climbed, it was near noon, and the day promised to be hot. It squeezed Kestrel's heart to hear the horse's breath. She'd ridden him too hard. But her left leg... The wound had stopped bleeding. The flap of her sliced trouser leg stuck to it, hardened with clotted blood. The cut stung, and the skin around it felt fiery. She was going to have to peel the fabric away to see what was underneath. The horse slowed and sighed. Kestrel didn't have it in her to force him forward. She shifted to dismount, then winced, and stopped when the movement opened the cut along its edges. Thirsty. The sun made her queasy. At the scout station she'd splashed water from her canteen onto the wound. In the forest, when she'd untied the horse, she'd poured water into her palm for the animal to drink, and did it again until there was nothing left. Now she could see the pale peaks of tents along the rise of the hills. She was close, and really, her poor horse. She'd moved again to dismount when she heard her name. Arryn was coming down the steep hill, skidding on the grass in his haste, yet keeping his balance. A breeze tore through his hair, kited his shirt. His descent became a breakneck run, and Kestrel wondered wryly whether the god of death watched over him after all, or maybe the god of grace, or heights, or goats, or whatever god might allow Arryn to run like that and not trip over a hillock and come tumbling down. It seemed a little unfair. He jogged up to her, his hair heavy with sweat. His skin had darkened on the trek south, but he seemed paler now as he looked up at her, shadows under his eyes. He hadn't slept. He noticed her hand first. Her left side was hidden from his view. It touched her, how his gaze went straight to her bloody right hand, his eyes flashing with the same thing she'd feel if her fingers were damaged, if she couldn't play, and had to hobble along the piano keys when she wanted to fly. He stripped off her forearm guard, swearing at the straps. "That's not my blood," she said. "You're not hurt." "Left leg." He came around the horse, saw, and went quiet. "All right," he said finally. "Come on." He helped her down. "I can carry you." She heard the question in his tone. "No, Roshar will see. He'll tease us mercilessly about it." She smiled, because she wanted Arryn to smile. She didn't like the way he looked, the drawn lines around his mouth, eyes hooded with worry. He didn't smile. He cupped her face with both hands. An emotion tugged at his expression, a dark awe, the kind saved for a wild storm that rends the sky but doesn't ravage your existence, doesn't destroy everything you love, the one that lets you feel saved. Nervousness rose within her. It simmered, sickened, unreasonable. She knew that she could lift her parched lips to his and taste the truth of his love on his tongue. Still, she couldn't say what she wasn't sure she felt. Her thigh throbbed. "No carrying," she said lightly. "But I'll let you help me up the hill." Leading the horse behind them, they moved slowly through the camp. Arryn's arm under Kestrel's shoulders. He brought her to his tent. "I think..." He hesitated. "Inside. You could stay outside, but..." He glanced down at her bloody thigh. "The trousers need to come off. I can fetch someone else." "No. You." His eyes flicked to hers, then away. She went inside the tent. There was no canvas floor, only grass and a bedroll. She sat on the ground. Arryn glanced at her dry mouth. "You're thirsty," he said, and left. He returned with a canteen, a bowl of water, a small pot, and clean gauze. She drank. The water seemed to fall down a long way inside her. She thought about the water, how amazing it felt to drink. She thought about that and not him. Aaron knelt beside her. She set the canteen aside. The cut was a dull pain, almost nothing in the wake of her heightening awareness of him, her rapid heart. Outside the tent, cicadas sang. He unbuckled her armour and lifted it gently away. Nowhere else. Just my leg. It was a relief at first to be out of armour, yet once it was gone she felt exposed and too soft. Aaron didn't move. She knew what she was supposed to do next. Her fingers fumbled as she reached to unfasten the fall of her trousers. "Wait," Aaron said. "Just—" He stopped, then continued. "Leave them on." He reached into the rent in the left trouser leg and ripped it open, carefully forcing the path of the rip to circle her thigh. Soon the cloth was almost entirely detached, save for the flap still stuck to the wound. He tipped water onto it to soften the fabric. "This will hurt." "Do it." He peeled the flap from the wound. She sucked in air as blood ran. He pulled the cloth free, leaving her left leg almost entirely bare. He rinsed the wound. What? Aaron lifted his dark head and smiled. "It's not so bad." She glanced down at the blood. "I mean," he hastened to say, "that you don't need stitches, which is good. Not that it's not bad for you, or that it doesn't hurt, or—" She laughed. "Aaron, I'm glad too that it's not worse." He began to clean it. Pinkish water ran down her leg. The ground beneath her grew damp. He blotted away blood with gauze, and it did hurt. Yet his touch was tender, and he was skilled at this, so that when he unscrewed the pot of whitish salve and began to dab it along the cut, she asked, "Did you learn this in battle?" His head remained bowed, and he kept his gaze on what he was doing. "Some things, others from books, or—" He abruptly stopped. "Aaron?" "Under Valorian rule, we learned to do what we could for ourselves, for others, when we were hurt." "When they hurt you?" He shrugged, reaching for the roll of gauze. "I should have known. I shouldn't have asked. You can ask me anything." The cream was cool and tingled. Her whole body relaxed with the absence of pain. He placed gauze on the wound and unwound the roll, wrapping it around her thigh. Her gaze followed the gauze as it circled her skin, came up between her legs and down again. His palm brushed her inner thigh, rough and warm. They fell into silence. Aaron came to the end of the gauze, which he threaded through its other layers and knotted to itself. He was done, yet didn't move. The heels of his hands were against her knee, palms flush against her skin, fingertips skimming the gauze's lower border. Better. Her body felt lax and alive. She didn't want to answer him. If she did, his hands would slide away from her. "Kestrel?" "Yes," she said reluctantly. "It's better." He stayed still. Outside, cicadas ticked and buzzed. He met her gaze, his eyes in shadow. His fingers traced a pattern that had nothing to do with healing and seemed to open her flesh in glowing lines. Her breath caught. He heard it and rocked back onto his heels and stood and crossed to the other side of the tent in one rapid motion before she could say anything. And then there was nothing, really, to say. Aaron sat near his bedroll. "What happened at the scout station?" Kestrel sank her hands into the leftover water at the bottom of the bowl. She rubbed at the bloody grime on her right hand, concentrating on it. That glowing feeling ebbed. Inconvenient, she told it. Problematic, now of all times. What is wrong with you that you can't respect a friend who has asked not to be used? That everything sparks and burns at the hope of his temptation? That maybe he'll heed it, sink down into it, and it will comfort? It won't. Not for him. Maybe not even for you. She washed her hand clean. Kestrel told Arryn everything from when she'd left camp last night to the moment when she drove a rock into the officer's face. "I killed him," she said, and would have said something else, yet faltered. Arryn frowned. "You feel guilty?" "He wasn't wearing armour." Arryn flicked an impatient hand. "His mistake." "He cared about me." "What do you mean?" "I mean Alice, the scout. He was concerned about her." "Are you saying that you're sorry you killed him because he was a nice person?" "I'm saying that he was a person, and he's dead, and I did it." "I'm glad you did." "I'm not." Now she was angry too. "Are you aware," Arryn's voice hardened, "of what he would have done to you?" "If he tried to kill me, he would have succeeded. He didn't want to. That's the only reason I was able—" "He didn't want to kill you because he wanted to capture you." "I know. I can know that and still feel sorry." "Don't ask me to share your sentiment." "I'm not." "If he'd taken you—" Arryn stopped, then said, "They're murderers, slavers, thieves. I am not sorry. I will never be sorry." "So you've never questioned a kill?" His eyes flashed, then looked haunted. "I won't." Kestrel searched his face, her anger fading with the reminder that their difficulties were different, and Arryn's own damage ran deep. Whether she meant to or not, she was probing into raw places. "I've upset you." "Yes, I'm upset. It's upsetting to hear that you feel guilty for defending yourself against someone who would have hurt you." "There's more to it than that." He looked down at his hands, spotted with her blood. "You can change your mind. It's all right if you do. You don't have to be part of this war." "Yes, I do. My mind isn't changed." "It was him or you," he said softly. "You had to choose." Her gaze fell to the wet grass beneath her, the wrapped bandage. She thought of her past, her whole life. "I want better choices." "Then we must make a world that has them." When Roshar saw her ripped, one-legged trousers, and Arryn at her side as they stood outside the prince's tent, his eyes glinted with mirth, and Kestrel felt quite sure that the prince was going to say it was about time Arryn tore her clothes off. Then Roshar might comment coyly on Arryn's inability to reach a full conclusion. "Only one trouser leg," she imagined Roshar saying. "How lazy of you, Arryn." Or on the quaint quality of Arryn's modesty. "What a little lamb you are." Perhaps he'd offer condolences to Kestrel on the partial death of her trousers. He'd ask whether she'd gotten injured on purpose. Kestrel flushed. "Things at the scout station didn't go according to plan," she said, stating the obvious in order to shunt the conversation to where it should be. Not, absolutely not, about what had happened or didn't happen in Arryn's tent. "She's wounded," said Arryn, who, although he didn't look it, must have also been flustered if he, too, felt he had to state the obvious. "Barely," Roshar said. "A mere scratch, or she wouldn't be standing." "You could offer her a seat," Arryn said. "Ah, but I only have 2 chairs in my tent, little Herani, and we are 3. I suppose she could always sit on your lap." Arryn shot him a look of deep annoyance and pushed inside the tent. "But I could have said something so much worse," Rochar protested. Say nothing at all, Kestrel told him. That would be very unlike me. She ignored him. When the three of them were inside the prince's tent, Arryn chose to stand, she explained in detail what had happened. I wrote the letter to the general, she finished, and launched the hawk. How many sets of codes do Valorian scout runners use? Rochar asked. Kestrel dug her thumbnail into the teak arm of her chair. Many. I'm not sure exactly. I might not remember all of what my father taught me, or he could have chosen to teach me only some of them. New ones could have been created and put into use since then. So the chances that the letter you wrote is the correct code and will be the one the general expects to see are slim. Yes. How did you choose which code to use? Arryn asked. The officer had counters in his tent, which was unusual, unless he was in charge of accounting for the army's supplies, and that had been done at the main camp where supplies are kept. I remembered a numeric code. He could have been using counters to help him write in it. Or, said Rochar, your father will read the note, see one code when he expects another, and will send someone to the station where there's a dead body. If so, Arryn said, then we're no worse off than we were before. Oh, yes, we are. The general will know the letter's a ploy, and will do the opposite of what we want. He'll ignore the main road. He'll take back roads through the forests where our guns would be of dubious use, and we wouldn't have the advantage of height. You know this. Arryn shut his mouth, glancing uneasily at Kestrel. Yes, he had known this, as had she. She felt worse for his effort to make her mistake seem smaller. He knew its true size. Rochar leaned back in his creaking chair. His eyes slid from Arryn to Kestrel, black as lacquer, the green lines around them fresh. Can you tell me anything more cheerful than all this? My letter mentioned nothing about a plan to use plague bodies as a defensive attack during a siege. I had to say that to the officer, to make him keep his distance, but once he was dead, that lie wasn't necessary. Now the manor can seem to be an even easier and more appealing target. If your father takes the bait. She did what she could, Arryn said. The numbing properties of the ointment on the cut in her thigh were wearing off. She rubbed at the bandage, studying its interleaving, and tried to swallow her sense of failure, which grew worse to hear Arryn defend her. I know, Rochar said, but our force is small enough as it is. We can't be in two places at once. He's going to move on Erilith. I don't want to fight a defensive battle. We can't afford it. If conflict happens here, we'd have the height of the hills, but they've got the numbers to fan out and flank us. What I liked about the plan of attacking them on the road was the chance to pen them in, to pin them down so that they can't move. Then trust her. Kestrel glanced up at Arryn. Rochar said, sending that coded letter was a desperate gamble. It was her desperate gamble, Arryn said. That's why I think it will work. They were to break camp at dawn. Kestrel watched Arryn disappear among the supply wagons. She went to the river, washed the blood and sweat from her, then changed the shredded trousers, which had been the scouts, for the pair she'd worn when she'd ridden south. She did not think very much. She watched leaves bend in the wind and show their pale underbellies. There was the rushing water, the cicada's metallic rasp. She walked back to the centre of camp. Arryn had set up a wet grinder and was, it seemed, going progressively through the spare arms stored in a wagon, inspecting each blade. He frowned at a sword and held it down at an angle to the grinder, setting its stone in motion. The sound was harsh. Then his gaze flicked up. He saw her, and the grinder stopped. She approached. "There are Dacron Smiths in this camp. Other people can do this." "Not well enough." He spread oil on the blade to polish it. His fingers glistened. "I like doing it." Aaron held out his oiled hand. "May I?" For a moment she didn't understand what he wanted. Then she drew the dagger he'd made for her and gave it to him. Aaron looked it over. Surprised, pleased. "You take good care of it." She took it back. "Of course I do." Her voice was rough and wrong. He peered at her. Friendly, he said, "Yes, of course. Is there a saying for it? A Valorian always polishes her blade, something like that." "I take care of it," she said, suddenly both miserable and angry, "because you made it for me." She hadn't liked his surprise. She disliked herself for causing it, for the knitted confusion of her feelings, for the way she'd grown smaller to hear Aaron defend her to Roshar, not simply because of the force of her sense of failure, but also because she'd asked Aaron to trust her, and now he did, unwaveringly. Yet he'd asked her to love him, and she offered nothing. She swung between the solid certainty of attraction and the apprehension of more. "I love you," she told her father. A plea, an apology, and also simply itself. 18 years of love. Was it really nothing? So worthless? Yes, it had been. She'd seen this when her father had lifted her clutching hands and pushed her away. She'd seen it in the dirt floor of her prison cell, heard it in the sound of her soiled dress ripped open along its back. She thought of the hawk, which must have winged its way to her father by now. She imagined it slewing around trees, dropping down, talons closing around his upraised fist, her father unrolling the coded message, the trap she'd set for him. "Walk into it," she willed. "You have a mind for strategy," he'd said once. "Come see, then. See what I can do to you. See what you have done to me." "Kestrel?" Aaron's voice was hesitant. She realised how she must look, hand clenched on the dagger's hilt, a storm in her face. When he started to speak, she cut him off. "Do you have more of that salve?" "Oh." He fumbled under the leather apron he wore over his clothes and pulled the small pot from his pocket. "I should have given it to you earlier. I was distracted. I forgot." She took it and left. Usually she enjoyed her tent. It was private, which made her recall that she'd always felt watched before the prison. In the capital, certainly. Even in Heron, when it had been a colony. Privacy was a relief. The circle of rough canvas cocooned her. It glowed or dimmed with the passage of the sun. Now, however, as she heard the noises of camp, people talking in 2 different languages, horses and birds and insects, and the burr of the grinder, she felt as she had on the first day Aaron had pitched her tent. Lonely. Kestrel removed her trousers and unwrapped the bandage. It was damp and heavy from the river. The cut wasn't bleeding. It didn't hurt that much. She spread ointment onto the cut anyway. When it numbed, she thought of the prison's nighttime drug. Her chest throbbed with a slow pang. She missed the drink's taste and what it did to her. She painted the cream down her thigh where Aaron had touched her. The skin went numb. Kestrel bandaged herself again and tried to envision the morning when she'd break down her tent, break camp, and strike south to attack her father. Chapter 27 They split their forces once more. A contingent was sent to Erelith's manor to make it look ready for a siege. If Kestrel's father trusted the coded note, he'd run scouts ahead to gather information on the manor. Roshar sent most of the supply wagons there, all of their cannons too, a risk. Fast and light. He spoke as if this were an entertaining choice, and not a dangerous necessity to leave their main artillery behind. But stealth was necessary, as much as a small army could be stealthy. Speed was important too, and the terrain was bad for hauling anything. They'd need to work their way south through the forest and up to the hills overlooking the main road. "I'm worried about the trees," Kestrel said to Roshar at the end of the first day of their move south. Iriel birds hunted overhead, swirling into a black fingerprint against the violet sky. Kestrel flicked a playing card to the grass. A rabbit was roasting on a spit over the nearby fire, its skin a crackled brown. Arryn slid a knife into it, separating the flesh. Too pink. He added sticks of resinous syren wood to the fire. They caught instantly, blazing blue. "Worried how?" Roshar glanced at his cards and groaned, but Arryn, who'd been watching their game without taking part, had already guessed what Kestrel was thinking. "We need the trees for cover," he said, "but they'll make it hard to use the guns. We won't have much hope of hitting targets on the road below." "Better cut them down." Roshar took his turn. "The wood's undergrowth might be enough to screen us if we lie low." Kestrel clicked her teeth, an Eastern irritated sort of sound. "You learned that from me," the prince said, pleased. "Now tell the truth. Did you mark the cards?" Coolly, she said, "I never cheat." "We can't cut the trees down," Arryn said. "Concentrate," Kestrel told the prince, sweeping up the card he'd tossed down. To be clear, I'm letting you win. I let you win all the time." "Obviously we can't cut them down," she said. "My father will notice a sudden swathe of felled trees. We might as well paint a sign telling him we're there." "Or," Arryn said. She glanced at him. "What are you thinking?" "How much rope do we have?" 212 lengths. Roshar said. "You've been going over our supplies?" "Yes," she said. "Could you rattle off the units by heart?" "Yes." "How many sacks of grain for horses?" 62, play your card. You might as well. You're going to lose regardless." "Attempts to distract her don't usually work," Arryn told him. "You play the winner then," Roshar said, "so that I may observe your technique." Arryn checked the rabbit again, pulled it off the fire. "No." A surprised disappointment twitched insect-like inside Kestrel's chest. Roshar said, "Why not?" Arryn sliced meat off the bone onto a tin plate. Kestrel, who wasn't entirely sure she wanted to hear Arryn's answer, said, "Why do you want rope?" "Let Arryn surprise us," Roshar said. "That's how we do things. He comes up with something brilliant, and I take the credit." "Tell me," Kestrel said. Arryn set down the plate. "I won't play you because even when I win, I lose. It's never been just a game between us." Roshar, who was stretched out on his side on the grass, elbow crooked, cheek pillowed on his palm, raised his brows at Kestrel. "I meant about the rope," she muttered. Roshar's gaze slid between her and Arryn. "Yes, the rope. Why don't we talk about that after all? Shall we?" They were in position. Kestrel waited with the gunners behind a thin layer of trees bordering a hill that overlooked the road. A breeze flipped the leaves. Trees creaked. The gunners, mostly Harani, nervously looked up at Arin's project. It had taken nearly all the soldiers the better part of the day using two-handed saws from the supply wagon, axes too, and of course the rope. Arin had tied each tree trunk and staked the rope deep down into the forest floor. Each tree was unique, its height and width and lean calling for a different network of ropes, set at different angles. After the trees had been tied into place, soldiers sawed them at their base, though not quite all the way through. "When the Valorians come," Arin had said, "cut the ropes." "You want to kill me," Roshar had said, "embarrassingly. A prince meets his end in battle. He doesn't get squashed by a falling tree. I bet you tied those things all wrong." A smile tugged at the corner of Arin's mouth. The air was gritty with sawdust. "After everything," he told Kestrel, "I wouldn't let you be harmed by a tree." "Me?" Roshar said pointedly. "You mean me?" But Arin had already gone. Soon after, Roshar left in the opposite direction. The plan was an ambush. "What formation would the general use?" Roshar had asked her, "for a march along a road of that width?" Kestrel had paused, fingers on the worn map. "She can't know for certain," Arin said. "Here's what I would do if I were him," she said. "I'd be in the front ranks, where I'd keep most of my cavalry, the officers. New recruits would be behind the supply wagons, which I'd keep in the middle. Infantry in the back, with a few trusted officers, just in case. I'd choose officers who wouldn't complain about being in the rear guard with the lower ranks. They'd be experienced, they'd be good, but there'd be few. Archers and crossbows flanking the regiment, ready to target the hills. He'll know there's a risk of a skirmish. It'd make sense, if we were readying for a siege at Erilith, to send small groups to harass their progress north. He'd expect the supplies to be targeted. If we destroy the wagons, we cut the legs out from under him. It's not that an attack would be a complete surprise. It's the force of our attack, and our ability to use a weapon he can't contend with, that gives us our best advantages." "So we give him what he expects," Arin said. "A small company of ours can attack the front lines, draw the general's attention while our larger force prepares to bucket the rear guard. The general should pull his defences forward. We might even separate them from the centre. Their officers wear metal armour. Volleys from the guns will be more effective on the centre and rear. The gunners should drop as many soldiers as possible around the wagons. And God's help us, the cannons. A small company attacking the Valorians' front ranks," Roshar mused. "How delightfully suicidal. Perfect for you, Arin." "But," said Kestrel. They both looked at her, and she could tell from the set of Arin's jaw that Roshar had said only what Arin already planned to do anyway. Arin's eyes were overcast. They had a distant, difficult regard that sent a chill down her spine. It made her wonder whether Arin's god was real after all, if he was there right now inside Arin, whispering to him. "You command this force," Kestrel told Roshar. "It should be you. Arin can attack the rear guard." With a smirk, Roshar said, "No, that pleasant task is mine. You, little ghost, stay with the guns." Kestrel's fingers tightened. "You're placing me in the safest position." "I'm placing you where you won't be seen by your father." She thought of the general seeing her. She thought of him not seeing her. Both thoughts were paralysing. "You're not so different from one of those guns," Roshar said. "A secret weapon. The general must know you've escaped the work camp, must guess where you went, if you survived the tundra. But will he think you're here with this army? He might, eventually. He might recognize your hand in these dealings, whether he sees you or not. But I would rather, and I'm sure Arryn would very much rather, that he have no confirmation of your presence. She started to protest. You swore an oath to me, Roshar said cheerfully. A Valorian honours her word. Seeing that his last words made her pale with fury, he grinned and left. You want me with the guns too, Kestrel told Arryn. Roshar's not wrong. He's choosing according to his own best interests. His brow furrowed. Positioning you with the guns gains him little, personally. What about your position against the General's forward ranks? Sometimes Roshar plays the selfish prince so that no one expects anything better of him. It's not who he is. He's choosing well. For me, he's chosen what I would have chosen for myself. I want the front lines. Kestrel remembered Arryn's words now as she waited in the trees with the gunners, who'd been placed under her command. She remembered how she'd wanted to explain to him that it had rattled her to try to slip into her father's mind, to know that the General's mind and her own felt upsettingly similar. She'd wanted to put her fear inside a white box and give it to Arryn. You too, she would tell him. I fear for you. I fear for me if I lost you. War is no place for fear, said the memory of her father's voice. Take care, she'd told Arryn. He'd smiled, and now he was below, out of sight, beyond the curve of the empty road. The sun poured down. The gunners had loaded their weapons. Kestrel watched the road, dagger ready. Cicadas, the flit of bird wings. Maybe her father had recognised that the coded letter was false. Maybe he wouldn't take the bait. A breath of wind. Hours passed, slow as the sweat travelling down Kestrel's back. Her limbs ached from being in the same position. She felt a strange energy slip over her and the gunners, an elastic tension that went tight at the smallest sound, then slackened in the heat. The waiting. Dream, wait, startle, wait, dream. The gunners, like her, crouched among ferns and saplings, guns angled down. Small eastern crossbows were at the ready. A syren tree dripped orange sap, its spindly branches low and sticky. Kestrel watched the road. The rapid tock, tock, tock of a bird's beak against bark. The brush of leaves. Then, faintly, stronger, the rhythm of thousands of boots on the paved road. Chapter 28. Arryn heard the Valorians marching toward him. The sound made his chest harden with anticipation. The Valorians neared, still hidden behind the bend in the road. Arryn turned to catch the eyes of his soldiers, no more than 50 of them, men and women, Harani and Dakran both, all of them on foot, for stealth and to appear more vulnerable to the Valorian front lines. Some of the Harani soldiers had lined their eyes in orange and red, like Dakran warriors. The sound of the Valorian army became deafening. Boots and hooves and wagon wheels, heavy armour, metal on metal. His gaze on his soldiers, theirs on him. Arryn lifted his hand. Wait. He edged around a tree to look down the road. The Valorian cavalry, enormous war horses, officers in black and gold, close. And one Valorian in particular leading them, looking no different than he had 11 years ago. Large and armoured, his insignia painted across the chest. A woven baldric over his chest, knotted at the shoulder, helmet simple, made to show his face. That face. Good to have a little distance, to not quite see the general's light brown eyes, too much like his daughter's. Better to have this man move his horse nearer to Arryn, almost within his reach. "Do you want him?" Arryn's god whispered. "Do you want to crush him between your hands?" Arryn glanced back at his company. "Ready," he whispered, and then whispered it again in Dacron. His sword was drawn, his blood was hot. "Sweet child, mine own. Go!" Kestrel saw the clash from above. Through a spyglass she watched Valorian warhorses rear. Not the general's. He became motionless, a metal statue. His face was far away, his features a blur. Her stomach clenched. And Arryn? Trees obscured her view. She couldn't find him. She couldn't see anything below the horse's shoulders. Infantry against cavalry. Kestrel, you fool. She realised that she must have believed in Arryn's god. Some unexamined part of her must resolutely trust the god of death's protection. Only that could explain why she had set Arryn against the Valorian vanguard, and her father, with any hope of survival. Dread worked its way up her throat. In the initial crush, Arryn lost sight of the general. An officer's horse nearly trampled Arryn, who dodged the reared front hooves. He caught a blow from the Valorian sword, its edge lodged harmlessly in the shoulder of Arryn's hardened leather armour. As the man tugged it free, Arryn snatched the reins from the man's hand and dragged the horse's head down, heard it scream. The Valorian struggled to keep his seat. Arryn buried the point of his sword into the man's side above his hip, just below the low border of the metal cuirass. Arryn pushed. An inhuman sound. Blood channeled down the blade. Arryn's hand was warm and wet. The Valorian started to slide from his saddle. His foot caught in the stirrup. The greave of his leg armour raked the horse's side, and the animal reared again, nearly dislocating Arryn's arm from his shoulder. He released the reins. The Valorian thumped to the ground. The horse plunged, ran wild, dragging the soldier behind him. Arryn couldn't think. He knew, vaguely, that enemy archers weren't firing on his company, probably for fear of hitting the Valorian vanguard. He knew that his own soldiers were falling around him. The Valorians, instead of pulling forward to meet the attack, stood their ground and grew more compact, a wall of metal and horses. Those stallions, the gorgeous brawn of them, high and huge. Arryn shouted in Dacron, then in his own tongue, "With me!" He drew his dagger, a blade in each hand. He ducked into the narrow space between two Valorian warhorses and sliced open their necks. Kestrel clenched the spyglass. The Valorian officers didn't advance, didn't separate from the middle ranks, didn't expose the supply wagons. A warhorse stumbled, then another. Her father hacked his sword down. It rose up red. She saw him shout. "Cut the ropes!" Kestrel told her gunners. "Now!" Arryn wanted to cry out. He saw an Eastern woman slip past the Valorian defences, hamstring a warhorse, and reach the general. Arryn wanted to say no. He wanted to say, "Mine." The general, steady on his steady horse, swung. He cut the woman's head from her neck. Blood jetted. "Hold formation!" the man shouted. The rest of the general's commands echoed in Arryn's ears as he blocked the downswing of a horsed Valorian's blade. "Rear guard, close ranks!" Arryn's sword arm ached. "Archers, eyes on the hills. Cannons at the ready." He dropped the dagger from his left hand, hooked his free fingers into the Valorian's leg armour at the upper thigh, and yanked. "Flankers, defend!" The Valorian toppled from his horse. soared into the fallen man's throat, a gurgling cry. The general wasn't fooled. He'd guessed this was no little skirmish. He held his vanguard back and let Arryn's company come in order to tighten ranks in defence against a larger attack. A horse shifted. A path opened between Arryn and the general. "Ah, yes," murmured Arryn's god. Then a rough, tumbling crash roared over the sounds of war. Arryn almost didn't know what it meant until a crack broke the air. The trees groaned, tipped forward and thudded down. Most lay where they fell, but a few slid down the hill toward the road. They gathered speed, slammed into boulders or the trunks of other trees. Some speared down, leafy tops first, stopped by nothing, or shunted by an obstacle into a diagonal roll that spun them off the hill and onto the Valorian army's left flank. The trees crushed men and women, cut a swathe into the middle ranks. Noise rang through the hills. Each thump and scream split the air. It sounded worse to Kestrel as the echoes died. She didn't want to hear silence. "Ready a volley," she told the gunners. "Aim at the middle ranks, target archers, drop the flankers, drop anyone near a cannon. Cut a hole around the supply wagons." The gunners' faces were unafraid. Their position was mostly secure, well out of range of Valorian arrows. Cannons might be a problem, but the army below was still fumbling to unhitch cannons from draft horses and unload ordnance from the wagons. Kestrel was about to disrupt that. "Matches," she said. They were struck. "Light." Short fuses burned. "Aim!" Gunfire perforated the air. Arryn heard what he couldn't see. The song of metal sailing through space. Iron balls, each no bigger than a small stone, hailed down. They punched into metal, rang on stone, drove into flesh. Guttural screams. Arryn saw the general's face go grey. Horse carcasses lay between Arryn and the general, the shuddering wave of a stallion trying and failing to stand, the pitiable arch and flop of the horse's neck, and Valorians, 2 rows of them, trying to hold the front lines, confused, frightened, their eyes not where they should be. Arryn pushed forward. Another volley of gunfire. Far away beyond the Valorian army came a new sound. Hooves rattled fast up the road. There was a shrieking clash. Roshar's company must have struck the rear guard. The general shouted something incoherent to Arryn. The Valorian formation wobbled, seemed ready to dissolve. Then a cannon boomed from the central ranks. A second cannon. The world became too loud for Arryn to understand anything he heard, too fast for him to understand more than what his body did, and did again. Blood was in his mouth. His hands were slippery. His muscles were loose and alive. A cannonball thudded into the hillside, not far below the gunners. Kestrel felt the impact's tremor in the earth. It vibrated the soles of her boots. It trembled the thin, gummy twigs of syren trees. "Again," she told the gunners. But despite the gunfire, despite an attack on 3 fronts, the Valorian army didn't collapse or panic. The rear guard countered Roshar's attack. The Valorian army, thousands strong, segmented into 3, front, middle and rear ranks. But Arryn's company, from what Kestrel saw, couldn't drive through the vanguard to reach the centre. The rear guard's defences were better than she'd hoped. Roshar made little headway. Even divided, the Valorians would overcome their attacks. The only way to cripple Kestrel's enemy for the long term was to destroy their supplies. But the guns, deadly though they were, weren't precise enough in their aim. They couldn't open a path for either Arin's or Roshar's company to reach the supply wagons. Anxiety clawed her belly. Roshar, she thought, would have the good sense to retreat if he must. She wasn't so sure about Arin. She thought that if she couldn't drag a victory out of this battle, he'd struggle against the vanguard until it overwhelmed him. "The solution is simple," her father whispered inside her. Kestrel didn't know whether it was a memory or her imagination. "If you can do it." She looked at the syren trees. Their sap oozed. She heard the plunk of an iron ball dropped into its chamber, the dry pour of black powder, as the gunners reloaded their guns. Kestrel shakily tucked her braid into her leather helmet. She could do nothing about the obvious Valorian style of her armour. She remembered how she'd been uncertain whether she wanted her father to see her. A shudder ran through her. No, not seen. Never. Whatever happened, she didn't want to be recognised. She scooped a handful of forest earth and scrubbed it onto her face. Kestrel became aware that the small sounds of reloading guns had stopped, giving way to the dull roar of the battle below. The gunners, crouched low like she was, regarded her. She stood. "Which of you is truly brave?" The Valorian vanguard changed tactics. They moved forward now, pressing Arin's company back. A hand caught Arin's arm, pulled him from the path of a charging horse. He turned. No one. Bodies and blood. And then an eerie energy in his veins. A sharp zing that made his gut tighten and his guard go up right before a tiny Valorian dagger flew into his vision, spiking through the air, straight for his throat. As the gunners fired, Kestrel sliced her dagger through the shreds of rope left tied to the stakes in the ground. She scavenged the forest floor for smooth, dry sticks of birch. Hands wrapped in broad leaves, she broke sappy twigs from the syren tree. Careful to keep her skin from contact with the flammable sap, she bunched the twigs together, holding them around a birch stick and one end of the rope. With a free hand, she wound the rope around the twigs and the birch stick. Then she held the makeshift torch between the dripping syren tree, letting drops of sap coat the rope and glue it down to the twigs. "Exactly like that," she told the 4 soldiers who'd agreed to join her. When they each had a torch and had taken a box of matches from the gunners, Kestrel said, "Don't hold the stick upright until you must. The sap will run. If it gets on your skin, you might burn too." She told the gunners to fire 2 more volleys and then stop. She and the 4 soldiers began to run down the hill. Arin dodged the small dagger. A needle. He knew that weapon. Needles were a set of 6 little knives. He caught the next one in his arm, flung up to block the dagger from his face. It bit into the exposed underside of his forearm, where his armour buckled. Then, either his assailant had grown impatient with targeting from afar, or a new opponent had entered the game. As pain flared up Arin's arm, somebody's sword crashed into his and knocked his weapon to the ground. Kestrel followed the scars made by the fallen trees in the forest. She skidded down the steep incline, the 4 soldiers following. A volley of gunfire shattered the air. A Valorian cannon boomed back. The cannonball crashed into the trees. They cracked. Broken branches hurtled through the air. A chunk of flying wood nearly hit Kestrel. Startled, she lost her balance and stumbled, getting sap from her torch on her chest armour. But she shouted, "Run!" They were nearly to the road. The second volley hailed down. Kestrel stopped the 4 soldiers at the edge of the trees level with the road. Peering through the leaves, she saw that the guns had killed enough soldiers on this flank that gaps in the Valorian defences here were wide. She spotted the wagon that must hold the black powder. A Valorian stepped out of it, lugging a cannonball in his arms. "Not that wagon," she told the four. "I'll take the one next to it. The rest of you each choose a different wagon. Ready?" Kestrel's fingers trembled as she opened the matchbox. "A commander never shows fear," her father said. Her hand steadied. She lit a match. They set their torches on fire. Arryn dodged the swing of the Valorian sword. He pulled the needle free from his arm, felt pain spurt. Arryn briefly eyed his attacker, a slender, quick form. The Valorian lashed out again. "Just throw it and run," Kestrel told herself. "Throw and run." She burst from the trees. Her boots hit stone paving. A crossbow quarrel soared over her head. Another hit a Harani soldier running alongside her. He sagged and dropped. One of the four, a Dakran woman, snagged his torch from the ground and lobbed it at the nearest wagon. Its canvas cover flared into flame. Kestrel kept running. She couldn't see what the woman did with the second torch, but heard a howl of pain, a shrieking Eastern curse. Kestrel understood only one word of it: fire. The Siren sap, Kestrel thought. Maybe it had run down the woman's arm. Maybe the Dakran was burning alive. Kestrel forced herself to run faster. Valorian soldiers were scattered now, disordered, cut off from the general. She heard another wagon crackle with fire. She ran erratically towards her target. "Never a straight line if you have to run," her father said. "Otherwise you're too easy to sight and shoot." She got shot anyway. An arrow hit her chest. When the sword came at him again, Arryn sidestepped it and seized the hand that held the hilt, squeezed, felt the knuckles pop. The sound and the scream were lost amid other sounds and other screams. With the needle in his left hand, Arryn pierced the Valorian's wrist and saw the red point emerge on the other side. Arryn ripped the sword free, claimed it as his own, and stabbed. Kestrel staggered, but didn't fall. The arrow hadn't penetrated her armour. She had almost reached her targeted wagon. Heart slamming against her ribcage, she glanced up at her torch. The sap traced a thin blue line of flame down the birch stave. Her fingers were hot. She threw the torch into the wagon's belly. Then she spun and ran for the trees. Her legs pumped hard. She felt the old wound in her thigh split open and seep. She shouted the names of her 4 soldiers, cried out with ragged breath for them to run. "Run!" she called in 2 languages, and then a third. Even in Valorian she shouted for people to flee, because her wagon was already a bonfire, and it was right next to the wagon that held the black powder. A breeze feathered her sweaty skin, a puff of wind. An explosion rocked the ground. The stone road shivered under Arryn's boots. Beyond the vanguard, above in the centre of the Valorian army's column, flame shimmered the sunny air. A Valorian horn blew. The sound curled, too pretty for war, Arryn thought. "Stop thinking," said his god. "Fall back, fall to the sides, the trees." Suddenly, there was a halo of space around Arryn. "Not yet," he murmured. "They are going to charge right up this road, right over you and everyone you're responsible for. Retreat, now." "But the general," Arryn thought. The god shrugged. "It's your life." "Do you truly care for my life?" A laugh. Arryn called for a retreat. From the trees on a hill, Arryn and what was left of his company watched the Valorians flee. They thundered up the road, as many, at least, as could run. The rear guard, caught between the fire and Roshar's company, had nowhere to go. Chapter 29. Later, Arryn learned that Roshar had eventually sounded a retreat of his own. The Valorian rear guard had been trapped by the fire, but their numbers still outweighed Roshar's. Desperation and excellent training made the Valorian rear guard difficult to overwhelm. "I have no particular interest in dying," Roshar explained when his forces had regrouped with Arryn's on the Gunner's Hill. "The loss of so handsome a man would do the world a great disservice." The rear guard had fled. The road burned. When Kestrel had staggered up through the trees, a broken arrow shaft in her armour, her face dirty yet white around her wide eyes, Arryn caught her to him, exhaling deeply with relief. She reeked of smoke. Her armour was sticky with siren sap. He guessed what she had done, and a tremor flickered through him, even though she was safe. He pulled away, then saw that he had printed blood on her. Traces here and there. A faint red leaf marked her cheek. He saw her see him. He didn't like to think about how he must look. "Your father's alive," Arryn told her, sure that it was the wrong thing to say, even as he was sure that it must be said. An emotion darkened her eyes. Later, after the fire had burned out and the road was a charred ruin littered with corpses, Roshar's soldiers had scavenged the remains, and Arryn had helped catch riderless war horses. Kestrel finally spoke. "He'll resupply." Her voice was flat. "The Empire doesn't lack for black powder. He might have to return to Ithria Island to get what he needs, but he'll hit hard when he hits next." The stolen supplies and their wounded were loaded in wagons. The army made its way to reunite with the forces left behind at Erilith. Outside Erilith, in the meadow near where they had first made camp in this region, Arryn came to share Roshar's cooking fire. The sun had just set. The air was still heavy and warm, cast with a honeyed light. Roshar was smoking. He'd been in a foul mood since they'd left the fire-blackened road, though Arryn had reminded him that the battle was a victory. "I know," Roshar had said, yet looked nettled. Arryn helped himself to warmed flatbread toasted over the fire. Soft bread on a military campaign seemed just short of magic. He ripped off a small piece and chewed slowly. Roshar glanced at him, huffed a little, but said nothing, which was disappointing, since Arryn had hoped to provoke the prince by taking his food. A Harani soldier passed close to their fire and moved on, though not before Arryn noticed that the man's eyes were rimmed with orange like a Dacron's. "That's nice," Arryn commented to Roshar. The prince choked on a lungful of smoke. When he stopped coughing, Arryn said, "Is it disrespectful that my people wear that paint?" "Oh, no," Roshar said, not sarcastically, yet with a bite that suggested that Arryn had missed the point. "It's nice." "Say what you mean." "I am not nice." Arryn's brow furrowed. "True, but we're not talking about you." "We should be. We should absolutely be talking about me." Arryn wished Roshar wouldn't do this, wouldn't slip on false arrogance as if it were mourning garb worn in the service of a joke. He opened his mouth to say so, then saw that Roshar looked genuinely troubled. "What's wrong?" Roshar said, "Do you remember how you attacked me in my city, in front of the Queen's Guard? To be fair, you had drugged and bound me. Do you remember how you were punished for that?" "I don't see what this has to do with the paint." That's because you don't understand your punishment. Uneasy, Arryn said, "The Queen told you to choose my punishment. You never did." "That entire audience with my sister was in Dacron, which you didn't speak or understand at the time. Or did you?" "No." "I was your translator. I warned you. I said that you had to hope that I wouldn't lie. Did you?" "Let's say that I translated very loosely." Roshar. "At the time, it didn't seem important. What would you care about the finer points of Dacron law? And you didn't have anything worth taking." "What exactly did the Queen say?" "That your life belonged to me." Arryn, whose life had already belonged to many different people, felt his lungs shrink. "So yes," Roshar said, "I have the right to decide your punishment, to kill you if I wish. By our law, I can also seize anything you possess. You're not in Dacra. Your law holds no weight here. My soldiers would say otherwise." "What do you want?" Arryn's voice rose. "My house? This isn't entirely about what I want or don't want, but if we win this war, you'll have a prize very much worth wanting." Arryn saw what he meant. "This country wouldn't be mine." "Oh, Arryn, please." Arryn fell silent. They'd let the fire go out. Shadows had grown around them. "Puts my sister in quite an interesting position," said Roshar. "It was a public announcement, one that she clearly didn't think through, though I'll be honest and say that when you fetched up on our shores you didn't appear worth much. It cost her nothing then to offer me your life. It made for good courtly show. And now, whatever is yours is mine. Despite its miserably cold weather, Heron is a pretty prize. Rich, fertile, a good buffer between Dacra and the Empire. My sister has a few options, depending on how this war plays out. If we win against the Empire, we could seize Heron by force, which normally wouldn't cause a fuss, if it weren't for the fact that she'd be taking from me what our country considers legally mine. I happen to be popular with my people. Another option, she could ask me to give Heron to her. You wouldn't. Because you and I are friends? How touching and naive. That's actually what I like about you. You're so endearing sometimes. I'd never let you. You'd have to kill me. Yes, little Herani, I know. Roshar set aside his pipe. He brushed his hands as if cleaning them, then looked down at their emptiness. Arryn was no longer angry. You wouldn't, he said again, or you'd never have said any of this to me. I'd like to think that, but we're talking about the same person who deliberately let his little sister be taken hostage by his enemy. What will you say? That we all make hard choices, do things we regret, betray our best selves? Yes, exactly. I have wanted to tell you. I didn't. Not for months. What did you think would happen if we lost? Usually I don't think. Usually my sister thinks and tells me what to do. I'm quite comfortable letting other people run my life. You never say what you really mean. Roshar held his eyes. If we lose, I'll take you home. Your home. Mine, yours. Not possible. Roshar sighed. Well, lots of things are. Your sister, Arryn flushed. Oh, that. How does that play into this? Well, that, as I understand, happened in my city when you were just a ragged, trespassing foreigner of little importance. Of course, Roshar gave him a sidelong look. You have your charms. Now you've put an end to that, which, I don't know. I think that if I were you, I wouldn't have. Your country could always be returned to you as a wedding present. Arryn made a frustrated sound. It might be better for you if you didn't draw everything into such rigid lines. Roshar thumbed more tobacco into his pipe. It might be better for me if I did. You know how I feel, where I stand. Roshar arched one brow. Indeed. Chapter 30. Kestrel stopped short of where the prince lay on his back in the grass in the midst of camp, eyes loosely closed against the sun. It was rare to see his face relaxed. The sun showed how scar tissue had thickened his upper lip and knotted where the tip of his nose had been. She knew he wasn't sleeping. Lazy, she accused. This is how I look when I conspire. No Valorian commander would let his soldiers see him like this. This is a strategy. She snorted. It is. His eyes were still closed. Aren't you going to ask me how it is? She toed him. He stretched like a cat and seemed to settle back into position. Then his hand lashed out, seized her ankle, and yanked her leg out from under her. She landed on her rear. Yes, Roshar's black eyes glinted as she spluttered. A masterful plan. Divine. Kestrel kicked him. Shh, lovely lady, won't you hear my plan? It is the very best, you'll like it. Here it is. I am waiting. Sunbathing? Waiting, I say, for you to tell me what to do. She told him exactly what he could do. Such language! Did you learn that from Arryn? Stop kicking, little ghost. We're in full view of the camp. Weren't you just haranguing me about my honour? How can I cultivate respect in the rank and file if you kick me? Now, truly, look at my absolutely serious face as I say this. What would you have me do? More to the point, what will your father do? Kestrel went still. A move must be made, said the prince. Lerelyn. Kestrel had learned of the Valorians' failure to invade via the beach there. She knew how smooth the terrain would be from the beach to Heron's city. If victory is slow, her father would say, it becomes increasingly harder to grasp. He must wince from his defeat along the southern road. How could he wreak the most damage in retaliation? He could claw victory to himself by regrouping his forces to land at Lerelyn with overwhelming force, with countless cannons and soldiers spread thick and wide. A costly victory, but if achieved, it'd lead to a rapid seizure of the city. She told Roshar to garrison a contingent at Erelith to hold what they had well defended, and move the rest of his army west to reinforce the Dakrans stationed at Lerelyn. As she saddled Javelin and tightened the girth, she tried to quell the leaping worry in her belly. She should not worry. After all, what could the general do that she could not do? Had she not learned war at his knee? Did his voice not haunt her? She thought about the way her memory, or imagination of him seemed to advise her. She didn't like the way he was right, how she listened. She wondered if there was any difference between how she listened to him and how Aaron listened to his God. Hilly terrain smoothed as the army rode west. The land grew slightly arid, the dirt was a light grit. Kestrel saw how the Harani soldiers lured Aaron into riding with them in the middle ranks. There were requests that he consider the gait of an unruly horse, or a story left dangling, a teasing challenge. Finish it, Aaron, why don't you? If you can. Sometimes a question. Was Aaron sure he wasn't related to the Harani royal line? This flustered Aaron, and was so likely to hold him in extended conversation and vigorous denials that it was the most common ploy used to keep him in their company. Once, when Aaron let his horse fall back to ride with the Harani, Kestrel caught Roshar's sliding gaze, pensive, murky, a strange mixture of satisfaction and displeasure. Kestrel said, "I thought you wanted them to love him." Roshar glanced over his shoulder at Aaron in the middle ranks. They rode in silence beneath the hard blue sky. Then Kestrel said, "On the tundra, Aaron had a ring with a stone in it. Did you give it to him?" "Never lend that boy anything. Careless, he lost it." "It could put people to sleep." "Yes." "And that white salve, the numbing one, is that Eastern too? Is it made from the same thing?" "What an observant ghost you are. Yes, Kestrel. The liquid in that ring and the salve contain different quantities of a poisonous worm from our plains. A very little bit, mixed with ointment, will numb the skin. More will send you to sleep. More still, you take the goddess's hand and live with her forever." "Why don't you dip crossbow quarrels in it? I remember my father complaining about the poisoned arrows of the Eastern Plains people." "Alas, we're far from the plains and my supply is limited." He squinted at the sun. "Why do you ask?" She was quiet. He said, "You're not thinking about crossbow quarrels?" "Sometimes I have trouble sleeping." "In case I wasn't clear, that part about taking the goddess's hands means dead, as in you die. In its highest concentration, you can die from simply touching the poison, even when the liquid dries." "I'd be careful." Roshar swiveled his horse in front of Kestrel's, blocking her path. Javelin snorted and stopped. The prince said, "My answer is no." He said, "You're not the only one who suffers." He said, "You could do what the rest of us do." Roshar spurred his horse ahead. Kestrel looked down the open road. A lone blackbird cut across the sky like a crack in blue paint. She thought about the white salve in her saddlebag, the missing ring, and how much she longed to sleep easily, without dreams. "Nothing in dreams can hurt you," her father had said, which was another way of saying that life can. But she hadn't understood that as a child. Kestrel recalled the old comfort of her father's words and had a sense of herself as she had been. That night, alone in her tent, she thought about the cruel cold of the tundra, sulphur crumbling in her grip, the panic when her memory had begun to slip, the night-time drug, soft, dense, the fear of dying far from home. No one would have mourned her. Sorrow, like marrow in the hollow of a bone. It had been real. It still was. But it wasn't the whole of who she was. Kestrel blew out the little lamp, In the dark, she recalled the road she travelled that day with its cloud of dirt. "You could do what the rest of us do." She would keep going. That night, she slept deeply. Afterward, she sometimes still wished for the nighttime drug, but it no longer held her in its power. In this region, a variety of wheat flourished. Dull gold fields rattled softly. The grain, fully flowered, bent the stalks. In the distance, Harani harvested the fields. They were too old or too young for war. Other fields had been abandoned. Kestrel saw farms where chicken coops stood empty, smelling of sour straw. The animals had been slaughtered or carried away. A woven basket, left outside for months, had disintegrated into a spiky nest. When grasped, the handle came off. The farms unnerved her. She would have preferred to say that it was because of the waste. Most of the wheat would rot on its stalks. But it wasn't that. It was the buildings. The rare Harani villa, with a columned portico and fluted arches. The wink of an atrium's glass roof. More common, a splendid and newish Valorian manse, sprawling, flat-faced. The slave quarters blistered in the sun, paint peeled in long curls like an apple's skin. Kestrel noticed, with queasy misgiving, that a little house lay near the slave quarters on each farm. At first, when she went with soldiers to forage for provisions to fatten the army's supplies, she hadn't known what the little houses were for. There had been no such house on her father's property in Heron. One day, she saw Aaron see a small house. His eyes tightened. His expression went bleak. She knew then that the houses had been for children. The memory came unwillingly, sticky and slow. She had to drag it out. When she did, she understood that the knowledge had been the sort of thing she had once tried to unknow. It had been the practice to take a baby from its enslaved mother once it was weaned and sell it to a neighbouring farm. The mother would be distracted from her work, went the Valorian wisdom. Meanwhile, her master would purchase other children from other farms. These children forgot that anyone but their owners could lay claim to them, and were raised in small houses by an elderly slave. By now, such a child could be as old as 10 years. It had been commonly done in the countryside. In the city, not always. Some owners prided themselves on allowing their slaves to keep their children. Kestrel had once seen a Valorian lady coo over a Harani child. The tiny girl had wobbled where she stood in the centre of the parlour. Kestrel, who had come for tea, hadn't noticed the girl's mother at first, then had followed the toddler's gaze to see a uniformed woman waiting in a shadowed alcove. Kestrel's father had made clear that there would be no slave children on his property. If babies were born, they were soon sold. None were purchased. Each little house on each farm was a horror. Before, for years, she had let her mind close seamlessly, like an egg, around this wrong and other wrongs. They happened every day. It was life, but not her life. Hers, an inner voice, sinister, upsetting, had sometimes disagreed. Not hers. Hers. The words echoed now with the rhythm of Javelin's hooves. Kestrel could say that she'd learned that one's life is also the lives of others. A wrong is not an egg, separate unto itself and sealed. She could say that she understood the wrong in ignoring a wrong. She could say this, but the truth was that she should have learned it long before. The sky was frosted with stars. Kestrel found Arryn seated near a fire, squinting as he retooled someone else's leather armour. A buckle had come off. "Can you see well enough?" She remained standing. "No." He pushed an awl through a strip of leather. "But there's no time for this by day." The army pressed as rapidly west as it could, though not as quickly as Kestrel would have liked. Roshar had warned against a forced march. Weary soldiers make for lost wars. Her father had often said the same. Kestrel tipped her head back. The night glowed. "How do you make a mirror?" Surprise tinged Arryn's voice. "Do you want a mirror?" "No, I just wondered how." "You silver glass. It's not something I've done." She turned in a half-circle to look toward the western constellations. Her boots released the scent of bruised grass. "Before, people must have used polished metal." "Probably. Or bowls of dark water. The sky looks like a mirror, if a mirror was a bowl of black water." There was a silence. Kestrel took her eyes off the stars and looked at him. He'd set aside the armour and was turning the awl in his fingers. He flickered orange and red in the light of the low fire. Quietly, he said, "What are you thinking?" She was hesitant to say. He came to stand next to her. "Arryn, after the conquest, what was it like for you?" "I'm not sure you want to know." "I want to know everything about you." So he told her. The stars, too, seemed to listen. They left the wheatlands. The soil became loose. Fresh water seldom. On the 5th day out of Erilith, however, they reached a stream and replenished the water barrels stowed in the supply wagons. Kestrel watched Roshar approach Arryn as he curried his horse. "Here." The prince thrust something at him. "Do us all a favour. You're filthy." Roshar looked him over. "I think there's still dried blood behind your ears." It was a cake of soap. Arryn appeared faintly startled, as if he lived in a world where soap hadn't been invented. He broke the round between his hands and offered Kestrel half. It crumbled a little in her grasp. Its scent was sweetly smoky. She stood there longer than necessary, inhaling the gift of a gift. It occurred to her that if she used it, and Arryn used it, her skin would smell like his. She tucked it carefully in her saddlebag, wrapping spare clothes around it so that it wouldn't be broken. "Come with me," Arryn, eyes illuminated. "I want to show you something." Kestrel followed without question, though the army's midday rest was nearly over. They took their horses. She kept stealing glances at Arryn as they rode towards a grassy hill. He caught her at it. "A secret," he said, and smiled. It felt as if his smile became hers, his secret too. The day itself, the satin sky, a speckled yellow feather that spiraled down on a breeze to catch in Javelin's mane. She held all this inside her, the way a jewel holds light. They dismounted at the foot of the hill. Kestrel noticed stone steps, overgrown with green, leading up the slope. It occurred to her that the entire hill, rare for this terrain, might have been man-made. "What is this?" she asked. The stairs, as far as she could tell, led to nothing. The hilltop seemed bare. Arryn plucked the yellow feather from Javelin's mane and tucked it behind her ear. A temple. At least it used to be. She touched the feather's ticklish plume, the slight scratch of the quill. She explored it, trying to ignore her pleasure at his unexpected gesture. Is that your secret? You wouldn't ask. Aaron's grin was mischievous, if you didn't guess that it is not. Come see. The steps were broken in places and wobbled beneath Kestrel's feet. When they reached the hilltop, she could see the jumble of marble that had been the temple's foundation. Perhaps it had been destroyed after the conquest. The Valorians had razed all Harani temples to their gods, but these ruins looked ancient. The marble was bleached bone white. The carvings, polished smooth by time, were blurred and mostly indecipherable, like a dream after one has woken. It's greener here, isn't it? Aaron's voice was hushed. Than the rest of this region. Yes. There were birds' nests in the nooks of broken marble. A lizard darted over a fallen pillar. The place appeared at once ghostly and yet full of life. When Aaron stepped into the centre of the ruined temple and knelt, Kestrel thought it was to pray, but he was clearing away vegetation. I recognise some of this. He was eager. His words tripped over each other. He seemed unaware that she wouldn't understand what he meant. But other parts... I thought I knew all the stories. Kestrel came to kneel beside him. A face glittered up at her beneath strands of ivy. Startled, she pulled the greenery away. It was a mosaic. An entire, immense tiled floor stretched out of sight beneath the vegetation. Kestrel palmed away dirt. The face flared in the sun, its tiled features slippery and cool. The man, woman, had wings fanned wide, a peacock's colours, scaled skin, carnelian claws. Kestrel tugged more ivy free. Gorgeous, impossible creatures appeared. An enamelled snake with 6 tails, a horse made of water, a woman whose hair appeared to be paper scrolls written in a script close to Harani, but with so many alien elements Kestrel couldn't read it. Some of the figures looked only vaguely human. A string of eyes crowned a brow. One long violet-skinned body had no limbs. Gold spilled in a ribbon from the lips of a god. They were all gods. They could be nothing else. Maybe we should go back, Aaron said, but he didn't mean it. His mouth was reluctant. He licked his thumb and rubbed a tile clean, not raising his gaze, the sun tumbling in his messy hair. A wide blade of light cut across the bridge of his nose, warming his neck and shoulders. He moved, and the sun caught his face in full. Her limbs were light, as if with fear. Her blood seemed to float. She said, "Not yet," and saw his sudden happiness. She helped him clear the vegetation and expose the entire mosaic to the sky. Every chip of her being slid into place, into the image of a lost world, the boy discovering it, the girl who sees it spark and flare, and understands now what she feels. She realises that she has felt this for a long time. Lapis lazuli, kiln-fired glass, onyx and gold and shell and ivory, jade, aquamarine. Kestrel barely saw where each tile of the mosaic joined, the taut line of contact. Piece to piece, she pressed her palm to its surface and imagined its image imprinted on her skin. Later, Kestrel wished she had spoken then, that no time had been lost. She wished that she'd had the courage that very moment to tell Aaron what she'd finally known to be true. That she loved him with the whole of her heart. Chapter 31. Kestrel was unusually quiet on the last day's ride to Lerillon. At first, at the temple, Arryn had thought that some new, delicate thing had grown between them, but since then she had kept her distance in a way he couldn't explain, could find no cause for. He sifted through his memories of the temple, of her, the hot green leaves, the slick tile, the hidden world of the mosaic, and how Kestrel had wanted to see it too. He could find nothing wrong. An error lay somewhere, that was for sure. Still, each moment of each memory of that day made him want to hold them all in the palm of his hand, to stash them safely and close, in a deep pocket, perhaps, on his person. He was wary of this impulse. He suspected that he would be revealed as a child with a collection of precious things that were actually nothing valuable. A button, a river rock, a bit of string. Or a speckled yellow feather. He wished he'd kept it. He wondered if Kestrel had kept it. Most likely it had fallen from her hair as they'd galloped from the temple's hill to rejoin the vanguard of the army. Tawny grass rippled on the bluffs. The air was brackish. They'd soon reach the sea. When the army stopped to water the horses from the barrels among the provisions, there'd been no fresh water in this land for 2 days. Arryn found Kestrel brushing Javelin's coat. She glanced up at him, then away, her gaze settling on something else that Arryn wanted to identify, to understand whether it was him or what? The white threaded sky? That gull tipped up against the wind? That made her seem suddenly smaller. Her hair had reddened since coming to the south. Her skin was now the colour of toasted bread. Long fingers plucked stray bits of nothing from Javelin's mane. It was not the sky. It was not the gull. Arryn tried to set her at ease. So, strategist, what are our chances? Or do we ride to our dooms? The corner of her mouth lifted, an acknowledgement both of his effort to ease her anxiety and also that what he'd asked, however light-heartedly, was an odd sort of way to do it. Yet it worked. She became more present. The skittering movements of her fingers stilled. Not the battle, then. Not her horse. Not the slight crunch of sand beneath their boots. Nothing. Nowhere. Him. There are 3 scenarios, she said. We arrive late, and my father has seized the beach, or we arrive as reinforcements for a battle that has already begun, or we arrive before my father and wait, she added. Of course, there is a 4th, that I am wrong. He won't land there, and we've disastrously shifted our strengths where they shouldn't be. There is no 4th. She shook her head. I can be wrong. Is that what worries you? Even if I'm not wrong, and we arrive before the Valorians land, it's a mixed blessing. Him landing late means he's landing with a larger force, a robust artillery. More people and more cannon take longer to mobilise. They're also harder to defeat. Javelin knocked his nose against her shoulder. Arryn saw her smile. A quiet, lost feeling stole over him, like sleep or a farewell. I told my father I loved him. Her words were abrupt. It was the last thing I said to him. Arryn didn't look at her. He didn't want her to see his face just then. I saw a basket when we were in the wheatlands, she said. It had lost its shape entirely. You couldn't hold anything in it. You couldn't hold it. Kestrel, you are not a basket. I think... She stopped. He wondered if something can be so hard to say that it becomes hard even to say that it is hard. You can't tell me what you think? No. Why? She whispered. I'm terrified. Of the battle? No. Your father? Her voice was flat. He should fear me. Arryn didn't want to relax his sinewy need for the General's death. It clenched inside him. But if it was this, if there'd been no error at the temple, if Arryn had done nothing that he needed to undo, and instead what had made her seem to try to hide from him in plain sight was dread of Arryn's vengeance, or her own. Kestrel. He put it bluntly. He couldn't think of any other way. Do you want his death? Her eyes flashed. I won't do it, he said, if you don't want it. Kill him if you can. I don't care. He left me for dead. Worse. Arryn's hatred knotted within him. If I did, would you forgive me? You talk as if his life or death was your choice. It's been promised. She squinted at him. By your God. Not in so many words, exactly. She shook her head. Please, answer my question. Maybe it will be my hand, she said. My sword. I need to know your choice. Do it. Her eyes were wet. Swear that you will. The knot released. Yes, of course. He changed us both. She seemed to struggle for words. I think of you, all that you lost, who you were, what you were forced to be and might have been, and I have become this person, unable to... She shut her mouth. Kestrel, he said softly, I love this person. But her slim mouth tightened. Her face shone again with fear. Arryn curled his fingers into Javelin's mane. I am what troubles you. No, Arryn. But she had hesitated. He thought about what it meant that Kestrel's father had had her love and had cast it aside. He wanted to tell her about the jolt of recognition that had rattled through him when he'd ripped the ivy from the face of his god. How it had been like looking into the black water mirror Kestrel had described as they'd gazed into the clear night sky. He wanted to explain his hard joy, his relief of feeling fated for something, and how mattering to his god was akin to becoming a son again, or a brother. He wanted to warn her, to say that she couldn't know, not fully, what it was to no longer be someone's child. Kestrel asked, Are you afraid of the battle? This, at least, was easy to say. His smile was free. No. The beach was quiet, which wasn't true, of course, not with an entire Dacran regiment camped on its sands. But it quieted Arryn to see that the Valorian ships hadn't landed, that there were no sails on the horizon, and even if Kestrel had warned that this could translate to an overwhelming onslaught, he was glad to see the empty stretch of rain-darkened sand from the tents to the shore, to see the low tide, the muck of green-plastered rocks, the gulls squabbling over crabs as they picked through tide pools. The wind was dead. The sky a flat slate. It had stormed the night before. The briny air smelled raw. Roshar's people were so glad to see the arrival of their prince that Arryn doubted the way Roshar styled himself as someone with no political ambition. The Queen had her people's fealty, Roshar their love. This is a safe time of day, Kestrel said, then kneed her horse in the direction of the pale grass on higher ground, beyond which, they'd been told, was a stream that watered the army and its horses. Arryn followed, drawing his horse up alongside hers. Yes, the Valorians will land at high tide, he said. Kestrel looked slightly startled, not at what he'd said, but that he'd spoken at all. which made him think that her words hadn't been a start of a conversation, but rather just a moment in her mind that had somehow slipped out, and that she'd been deep in her own thoughts. She didn't bother to ask how he knew what she'd meant, probably because she assumed that the advantages of high tide for an invading force were obvious. "The sea will carry them swiftly to shore," murmured Death. "It will froth white, bear the weight of countless black-throated cannons." Arryn glanced at Kestrel. This battle would be very different from the ambush along the southern road. There would be no safe place, only the open arena of the beach. "Don't look at her, Arryn. Look at me. You will embrace them. Your heart will rise high and glad. What is an enemy? It is the stick and pull and slash of your sword. It is the clean path you cut between you and what you want. It is the path to me." The human stench of the camp had lifted. Kestrel and Arryn had ridden far enough away. There was only the swampy saline of low tide, the exposed underbelly of the sea. It smelled good. "You can wonder about her all you like," whispered Death, "but I am the only one who will have you." Kestrel had ridden a few places ahead. She turned, catching Arryn's glance. A bead of rain fell on his cheek, the back of his neck. "You are mine, I am yours. Is it not true, Arryn?" Her expression closed. He thought of a box shut so firmly that one cannot see its seams. "Yes." That night, Arryn stood with Kestrel and Roshar on the bluffs. Moonlight glazed the sea. The water sparkled black and white. The moon coated the sand with silver. "Pretty," Roshar commented, "though it puts me in mind of pure worm poison, the way it dries to a clear sheen." He asked Kestrel, "How do you think the battle will go?" Arryn answered instead. "For them and us, it will be the kind of battle where a general puts his soldiers in such a desperate situation that the fear of death and difficulty of retreat push them to fight their utmost, because there is no other choice." Roshar coolly lifted one brow. He looked ready to say that Arryn was being needlessly dramatic, but Kestrel nodded. The alarm came at noon. There was a faint drizzle. The sun was somewhere, but couldn't be seen. Off to the east was a solid ridge of grey cloud, and at sea, a faint pale line of sails. Gunners flanked the beach. The Dakran-Harani army waited in a wedge formation, the cavalry spearheading the bristling mass of people. Kestrel's face was taut, her hands white-knuckled on the reins. Javelin lifted and dropped one hoof, a muffled thud. There were flat, open Valorian boats on the water, thousands of them, heavy with horses and cannon. They rode from the anchored ships, oars lifted and dipped in the rain. Arryn couldn't hear the Valorian command. The sound of it was lost over the sea. But he saw when Valorian soldiers began to prime the cannons. He could practically smell the black powder. For a moment, he wasn't on his horse with a sword in hand, but on an unsteady boat, palms gritty with powder, hands ramming the charge home. They'd fire even before they reached the shore. A plea rose within him, surging hard as if unexpected. Although if he'd examined himself more thoroughly earlier, he would have known all along what he'd beg in this final moment, despite his promise to trust her. Arryn touched her shoulder. She startled, keyed to an extremity he knew very well. "Change your mind," he said. "Turn back. Go to the bluffs. Please." "No." Finally, he felt the fear that infected everyone else. "Then stay close to me." Whatever she said in reply was lost as the first explosion split and broke the world. Chapter 32. He didn't see where the first cannonball hit, but he heard the sick thud and felt the impact judder up from the beach into his boots. The shriek of horses, human cries, deep into the left flank. Roshar's army returned fire, mostly missing because it was harder to hit moving targets on the waves. Geysers sprayed where cannonballs hit the water. One speeding iron ball punched into a boat and splintered it. Horses and men slid into the sea. Black smoke plumed across the beach. The first Valorian boats nudged up onto the shore. Soldiers dropped into the water knee-deep. Horses were led down ramps. Cannons would soon follow. "Shatter them all!" Roshar ordered. His gunners riddled the first wave of Valorians, but there was a second wave, and a third, and finally a Valorian cannon was manoeuvred into position to blast one flank of gunners into a bloody, smoking, screaming heap. Aaron's horse reared. He wrestled it down, pressing his weight into his seat. He held the horse between his tight knees, preferring that than to tug at the bit, and he was distracted. Everything was loud. Even after he calmed his horse, he no longer trusted it to obey him. Then came a little sound he shouldn't have been able to hear, a dry swallow. He glanced at Kestrel. Javelin, magnificent warhorse, steady beast, was stock still. So was she, but her skin stretched thinly across her cheekbones. Her eyes were too large and pale. "Please," Aaron prayed, "give her your mercy." His god was amused. "If she doesn't believe in me, how can I believe in her?" The general had landed. Aaron could see him. He saw Kestrel see him. Several columns of Valorians pushed up from the shore onto the beach. Roshar ordered his vanguard forward. Death bit the nape of Aaron's neck, where a cat bites her kitten. "Maybe," Death murmured. "I'll show her the same kind of mercy I'll show you." Aaron's heart thumped. His blood rushed. He put a free hand to his stinging skin and drew it away, expecting blood. Nothing. A push of damp wind at his back, the trembling of the horse beneath him. A cannon boomed. The animal screamed, reared again. It plunged forward, through the lines of the vanguard, right into the oncoming Valorians. She couldn't see Aaron. She couldn't see him, and it felt as if she couldn't see anything at all. The cannons held their breath. Vanguard crashed into vanguard. She saw the collision happen a few ranks ahead. The spurt of blood, hideous masks of fear and hatred, an arm shorn from the shoulder, bodies shoved from horses, crumpled into the sand beneath hooves, and the cruelty of what she couldn't see. Where was he? Javelin hadn't moved. He was stone, which made her realise that she was too. One hand clutched a sword as if she could squeeze the hilt into non-existence. A sword. Her with a sword. She had no skill for it. Terror snaked through her, slipping and winding. The Valorians hadn't yet broken through the front lines. Artillery couldn't be used for fear of hitting one's own. There were a few brief moments before an enemy reached her, and maybe ahead, somewhere, was what she realised she feared most of all. Aaron's